much hate around this table. It's going to be used.
Who does?
Oh, I do.
You do.
Yeah.
Oh, we are live now, I understand. Looks like it anyway. Yep. Okay, well, we'll open our workshop meeting, which is a public meeting today as well. Today we've got a series of workshops. There'll be 3 parts to it, but this first part, as we know, is around the annual plan and a really important finalisation step. Before it then goes to council and is actually finalised. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over at this point. Nick or Mike, do you want to lead us through how we're going to do this?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. I'll just flick through to the. I'd like to flick through.
Might have to use the arrows down there.
Yeah,
Get it started.
seems that remote's always just there for decoration,
Sometimes you just want to
unfortunately.
get it started first. Before
Thank you.
Right.
These
Exactly.
Oh, right. So my thing's otherwise. Oh, right. Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Sorry about the false start. So the purpose and approach, this slide really gives you the approach that we're looking to use to manage the feedback that you've received from the community and to take direction from councillors with review to adopting, finalising the annual plan. So the steps you can see there are noting the requests for consideration, and consider staff advice on those requests, which is about 9 that I've summarised out of the feedback, workshop direction on those key requests, and then questions or direction on other matters, because clearly there's a wide range of feedback, and you've heard some of it this morning in the public forum that isn't necessarily annual plan, but nonetheless important for councillors and staff, the organisation to note. And, and they're covering operational matters, policy matters, and indeed sometimes performance matters. So, and there's appropriate avenues for councillors and the organisation to deal with those things outside of the annual plan. And then I'll finalise with next steps. So really looking at, it's really just a, and that's just giving you a quick, it's a navigation guide, just really showing you the obvious. We're at the finalisation stage and we're really looking at the prize here of adopting for 24 May, which is early and is taking into account our long-term plan process that we're initiating as an organisation. So the flyover feedback,
Double check that. Tim, are you hearing okay? Oh, great, brilliant.
Cool. So just a quick flyover of the feedback that we've received. There's you can think of it in 2 aspects. There's the feedback, the general feedback we've received on via our Your Say feedback platform, and there's letters that we've received from mainly organisations, of which you heard from some of them this morning. The survey feedback, the question around rates, and you can see the split there. 15 were outright, not supportive of council raising rates. 6 were supportive, and 21 sort of bits of feedback that you could probably use your judgment around. And I've just said, questions around just having confidence in our spend and how we're using that funding. And the general feedback survey question, the majority of that feedback was related to our flood and drainage activity, and particularly the Taieri. And looking at the letters and emails from organisations, 16 organisations, and I've just put some context around that in an LTP year we typically get around 60. So I'm sort of just pointing out it's more a case of who's perhaps not participating in this process because they might have their eye on the annual plan, the LTP, let's say. So just have that in mind. And
Well, But we weren't that open in inviting them this time around.
yeah, we were. So yeah, there was a
limited scope. Then, wasn't it?
oh, I see what you mean. Sorry, Brian. Yes, correct. It was
So we surprised only 16 because we threw away the inbox.
Remind us then, Mike, what the process was for the feedback and how widely that was distributed as an option. It was pretty wide.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty much identical to every other annual plan in terms of how we market and advertise the opportunity to participate. So really no different.
No different.
But the message is the key to it, which I think you're referring to, where this was an informal process, informal feedback. It's not a special cost procedure, but the fact that we had no significant change to our LTP and around that, no specific options or proposals other than, status quo people. How do you feel about that?
We didn't have a hearings process.
I think the point that Mike was
Correct.
making was that it was obvious we received far less submissions. So,
Yeah.
So we're agreeing.
Point, Madam Chair, let's not kid ourselves. We also agreed we weren't having a hearings
Yes,
process.
we've got that. Yep.
Yeah, we've
that's
got it,
right.
but why is it such a surprise?
It isn't a surprise. That's
No,
what we're
no, it's
saying.
not.
We're black and white saying we received 16 rather than the general 60. So, yep, that's the data. Thank you.
So I could go on record and we go out with our LTP comms coming up, we will be looking at back up to 600 to 1,000 submissions, because we'll have some really big things to talk to the community about, and they will engage and we will get the feedback. So this isn't surprising, as the chair's pointing out. So fees and charges, consulting specifically on that schedule, and again, just limited feedback on that, other than Federated Farmers and Business South commenting on it. So here's what I refer to as other aspects of feedback that I've gleaned out, and some of the key topics that I noted across all the feedback we received. Public transport, I mean, you can see them there, land and water regulatory framework, attributed to Forest and Bird, Fish and Game Council, ORC's role and relationship with economic development, some interesting comments here from Business South and QLDC, again, sort of policy related type comments, environmental implementation. You heard from Matt Hollier this morning with some interesting, again, policy positions on how services might be delivered in Otago. Managing flood hazards and responsiveness to climate change, and you heard some of that come up with reference to the Silver Stream, and you heard the DPA, Chris Ford, talking about how they'd like to be engaged in that part of our activity, and indeed with other TAs. And again, that's not necessarily the annual plan. It's just how we work behind the scenes or in public. And the ORC role around harbour management, and that's Peninsula Board there. Finance and funding. Federated Farmers came through with some pretty strong comments around, again, policy comments around finance and funding. As same with Business South. Probably more of an emphasis of trying to keep costs down. And a big thank you from Your Rescue Helicopter Trust.
Sorry.
So getting into the
Question.
Sure.
What,
We'll just wait a sec. Yeah, thanks.
it's just, there are two submissions at least about tracks and trails, and none of that's come up. I mean,
yes.
so that wasn't in there,
Yes, I've
sorry.
pulled that out as a key request. Yep.
but not under policy.
So, because it's in the key request, you're going to see that come through. So yeah, good point. I've used my judgment to
Okay.
actually pull out the 9 big things, and you might think that I haven't got it right, and you can step in
That's
as
good
governors
context,
and
Mike,
point out.
thanks.
So, yeah, that's
anything.
fine. Yep, that's.
Yep.
Yeah, you've made a judgment call. Yep.
Yeah,
cool. We
exactly.
can change.
So look,
Yep.
first of the 9 QLDC requests, there's 4 that really popped there. And the light blue is the staff advice around those 4 things. The first, their dedicated resource to support delivery of Wanaka and Hawea Community Shuttle. And for the OSC to take ownership of the data set that they've been generating around that, the work that they're doing about the pilot work they're doing around that shuttle service. And staff response, we have an existing 10K, we're just allocating existing budget there, and 10K to help contribute to the ongoing delivery of that pilot while we complete the business case on that. And there's, again, existing budget of 100K to complete that business case. Second point there allocates. So just to cut to the chase, the next 3, QLDC are really testing us around our funding commitment around these things, and we're responding by saying, look, we've got these covered off. For Lifelines Forum there, capacity in place, confirming that there's resource for the MPS HPL work again. And as we step through that, there might be some challenges around scope, but we'll just wait and see. But as it stands, there's resourcing to deal with that. Confirming resource for the regional coordination of climate change, and again, we're saying we're stepping ahead on that. And indeed, the estimates that you looked at, the draft you looked at in February, you would probably recall that we've increased our resourcing around hazards. Yes, that part of our business has been growing, which is part of it. And Francisco doing that work and reporting through to you soon on this issue. So we probably best to deal with each one as we go, or should I go through each 9 and then come back to them? How would you like to manage it?
What makes sense? Going through each one, probably.
Yep. Okay. Waiwanaka. I think that speaks for itself. You've got Waiwanaka seeking commitment from ORC for interim funding of 135K. And the funding underpins the continued delivery of Waiwanaka. And staff are referring to a paper that more broadly covers the issue of how council works with organisations like this and indeed potentially funds them. So just pointing out, this is a significant request, which obviously budget hasn't been allocated for.
Okay. Sorry, Mike,
Yep.
I'm just going to check in with exactly how long we're sort of allocating for this. So for this workshop, so they can chunk up how we're going to give feedback exactly on each one. Yeah. Sorry, so when will what was the allocation for this? Sorry, I wasn't going to be chairing this initially.
So is it 12:30's lunch?
Yeah, I think
the-
lunch
the-
is programmed for 12:30,
12:30,
but how long was lunch going to be? Is if we eat into that?
It's coming at 12:30, so.
Yeah.
So
we can
working
just-
lunch. It's a working
Yeah.
lunch.
Sure.
Because I'm just looking at the time, we got 40 minutes to get through all of these. So that's just going to be an indication to people of the style of how we're going to get through them. Yep.
About 2 hours first, and then 1 and 1, or 2 hours and then half an hour, and then 1.5. I think.
Yeah, we can
It's about a
flex
couple of
that
hours.
one.
A couple of
Couple of
hours,
hours for
brilliant.
your plan piece, and
Yeah.
then 2 hours will get us through the 2 different long
Thank
term
you.
plan
That's
components this
important. We
afternoon.
understand that. Thank you.
So
Thanks, Mike.
I'll just quickly touch on the requests, and then so
Sure.
council can see them in total.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back through them, and you can.
Okay,
You can deal
brilliant.
with
That
them
sounds
as a
good.
team.
We've got enough time to do that.
So-
Thank
so-
you.
So this is Waiwanaka, and as a subset of that, you've got Upper Clutha Wilding Tree Group, again seeking funding, 60k, and the staff referring to a wild conference strategy paper for May committee cycle, which will provide, some policy guidance on this matter. Southern Lake Sanctuary, who you heard this morning, the Target Fish and Game, requesting us to specifically look at Clutha Lagoon for enhancement, and stuff advice on that around prioritisation criteria has been developed for the next LTP Works program. And you've got your Dunedin Tracks Network requests, a range of matters there, and the staff request around that. Again, looking at a requirement for a policy position around our role with cycleways, or again, amenity recreation services. Federated Farmers, with a high level request around reducing our rating requirement from 23-24. And here's more general feedback around fees and charges. And as I said before, it's just Business South and Federated Farmers kind of making specific requests around that, and suggesting no change to the schedule as it stands. So they're the key 9 requests. And so I'd suggest that you work through those and then look at bringing in anything else onto the table that you think sits within that community feedback that warrants consideration and direction to staff. So looking at the QLDC requests, is there anything in there that you think that staff require guidance in terms of the final annual plan?
Sorry, where's the
Yeah, look, I was just going to note that paper. It's not the QLDC one, but the paper you referred to about larger scale funding, which I found is very helpful, is the 14th of September, not the 22nd of August. So if anyone's looking for it, try the 14th of September, because there's good stuff in that paper.
Thank you, Alan. Right.
I'm interested in QLDC, not knowing that this is already in the budget. And I think I'm just going to say that this is because we do not have our work streams clearly shown in our budgets. And if there's one thing we should be learning from this, is actually putting those line items in so that it can be clearly seen and not need to be, they can see it. And I'm hoping that, and I'm saying it now because we need to get our long-term plan much better and much easier to read. We know what we're doing, and so we understand where there may be savings that we're not interested in.
Thank you. Are there any other specific comments on QLDC's, not requests, feedback, counts for?
I'm just wondering if that 10K, if they are thinking that it needs more than that, is that enough? We haven't been clear on whether it needs to be more, which makes me think that Kate's right and that they don't really understand what's in our program.
So that's staff advice that I've had from the transport team. So I've assumed that they are talking to the trust, and that number just hasn't been magicked up. But confirmation on that.
Mia Lewis is the chair of the Lifelines group too.
I feel like that needs investigating. It doesn't sound like very much to.
Councillor Callagher.
Well, the staff response to really all of this is that capacity is already in place. So really, we should move on to accept that and move on to the more meaty ones.
Yep, is there any differing view to that? You're right, Nick, we're looking worried. No, you're okay, yeah?
No, I was just thinking that the comment about QLDC not, no, I think
Okay, yeah,
a bit of
sure.
it isn't that, a bit of it is they've misinterpreted things. I think like that Lifelines role, they've misinterpreted it when it was fixed term to cover a vacancy and it was always intended to continue. So that's my understanding. Isn't that right, Gavin? The Lifelines one, it was never just a temporary role. It was only fixed term to, because of a vacancy in recruitment.
If we have a role provided for an emergency management Otago to do these things, we have a fixed term person in there while we recruit. So that's how the fixed term start when the situation arises.
So that's the thing, is it's not that,
Okay.
you can say it's not communicated, but I sort of think that it has been, they've just misinterpreted.
Thank you. Councillor McCall, you got something?
No, I was just saying Tim's.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, Tim. Thanks, Lloyd, yeah.
Oh, thanks. Look, I'm sorry I'm not there today in person, but this is working fine for me. Look, just a question of clarification, really, and that is, what is the process around this? So have we got a certain amount of money that we are allocating over these requests? And if that's the case, are we supposed to be pro-ratering that certain amount of money over these? And then, Gary, I heard you mention there that, have staff got recommendations around these? So just a couple of questions there.
Those are both really good points. Yeah, I was thinking as well that we'd come to staff recommendations on them as well. That is helpful. But also, yeah, have we got a pool of money that we're divvying out now? I would say that case is no, and I think Tim probably knows the answer to that. But yeah, do you want to comment on that, Nick or Mike?
Yeah, we don't. This is feedback on the draft annual plan that got approved with the increased 18% rates rise. So these are all things that people have said, as Mike's pointed out here, the feedback on some of these things that are on that page right now is that they're already included in our work programs for next year. Some of the other ones are asking for money that is not in our work program. So if council was to consider that and wanted to do that, the question is, where would that come from? Or can it be fitted into an existing budget somewhere? And, you look at what might drop out of that deliverable. That's the question that council can either ask or, direct or and then we'll go away and we can have a look at that. But fundamentally, no, it's not that this process wasn't to go out and say to the public, come in with your grant request because we've got a pool of money. That's what we looked at earlier in the Eco Fund.
Yeah, so that rates figure that you spoke about hasn't been set yet. It's a draft, as you've also mentioned, so it could be altered as part of this process, I guess, and then recommended to council as something slightly different from that. So that's where we're at, and it's why Mike took us through the whole realm of feedback and requests so that we can see the full breadth of it as we're making decisions on the way through, or not decisions, giving feedback on it at this point. So Councillor Keller has put forward that we move forward from this one because basically we're doing most of those things. Unless, Tim, good point though, is there anything from staff that they would like to chip in at this point above that info? Doesn't look that way. Anyone got anything else different? Councillor Scott?
Just like if we're looking at the annual plan and some of these, and that may have already been said, will feed into our LTP, for example, conversation. I would have thought, for example, the one that's in front of me here, completely lagoon, the development of the lagoon, but potentially
Queenstown just at this moment, but
just as a general philosophy.
Yep. That's right. Thanks, Brian. Yep, that's right. Sorry to interrupt you. Yep. Okay, so it looks like we've got agreement on those ones, pretty much. Well, an indication for you.
I say, I can understand staff being defensive, but if someone is misinterpreting it, that means that we have to reflect whether we have been clear and not defend our position and not be defensive about it, but try and learn from it. Because if we're going to be defensive, we're not going to learn. And I'm just going to say, yeah, we can do better.
Can I just respond to that? I'm not disagreeing, but in terms of making a submission, the point of that is to emphasise what's important to them. So when they say confirm there is a resource in place or confirming there's a full-time equivalent role, that's not necessarily saying they don't understand it's there. That's re-emphasising how important it is to them. And even if they know we've got it, it wouldn't stop them submitting on it.
And positively, yeah.
So I just want to balance the comments about what we're not doing with an understanding of how this, and I know you know how the submission process works, Kate, you've been right across this from both sides of this process. So we've got to understand that often submissions are just saying things that may already be occurring that they know are occurring, to emphasise to all of us that that's really important to those groups, not that they misunderstand it or that we're doing it wrong.
Thank you. Yes, that's good.
Yeah, another point which isn't directly this workshop, but would be the consultation requirements that are quite strict for annual, well, LTP, which then transposes into annual plans as well, and they get audited and they're actually quite set as well. So I think that's something to come back to, because it does keep coming up, the style and how do people know the level of detail that they want to know in making a submission. So that's a different point and an important one. But Mike, I don't know if there's a quick thing you can say about that at this point.
Well, look, I just follow up on Richard's comment, because I spoke to QLDC, as I did to many organisations, around their feedback, and QLDC weren't speaking to you in public forum this morning for a reason that they're confident and in a good space with our organisation and the relationship. And Richard's quite right. I think you've got to look at their comments in the light of what's really important to them, and they're just sending you that signal. And we're saying, hey, we've got it.
Yeah,
we've got it covered.
Listening.
Yeah,
we got that. Yeah,
so
great.
I wouldn't read too much. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, why Monica?
Yeah. Why Wanaka, to protect the positive outcomes that they've been working on, that I'm sure you're aware of, and seeking commitment from council to providing trip funding of 135k. So it's a direct request there for funding for this financial year. I didn't see anything beyond that, but I'd assume that also, depending on your decision here, approaches in the LTP process as well. That's just my assumption. And that's the sort of the purpose that I could glean out of the funding request, with any more detail really than that, to underpin the delivery of what they've been doing to date, and to ensure that they can continue, as they transition from central government funding. I think that's the nub of it. And corrections. The 14 September paper rather than 22 August. So thanks, Helen.
All right, we've got some hands up. Councillor Scott, then Councillor Wilson.
Lloyd might want to comment on it, but I assume that Wanaka, not necessarily 135 grand, but has potential to seek funding through the Otago catchment community, of which this council funds significantly for some funding. Do you think that's fair, Lloyd?
Yeah, that's currently open, isn't it?
So, currently the Otago catchment community does have funding available, not to this type of level though, for on the ground actions to give environmental improvements. I don't particularly see that they could contribute in some way towards it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Kate.
So just wondering the process. We, some of us optimistically thinking that the government is going to make an announcement on the 18th of May that may assist in this project and one other. Will you have the capacity for our meeting on the 24th, I think, to have a paper verifying or otherwise what the budgets has done for these sort of projects? Would that be possible? And then, I mean, it doesn't help you now because we're not going to give you an indication, but if they were to get funding, then I'm feeling much more relieved. If they didn't, I would be feeling very, very concerned. So it's almost, if they don't get funding, I really might want to be considering how we can assist them to an extent. Does that make sense? But if they,
Yep.
Timing is not perfect.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's really difficult at the moment. Yeah, Councillor McCall.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we have to tread really careful on the next two items, because at the end of the day, both these groups have had significant government funding for a specified period of time, and they've known that from when they've got the funding to organise their businesses in such a way that they are either enduring or not. So, and I don't believe that it's our role as a regional council to step into give continuation because of their choice of how they spent their funding. So I think, there's two requests on the table. If there's lots of other projects out there in the same situation, so we've got to be very careful. We go picking out the one or two that are making that have come to us without having the same offer going to other organisations that are in the same situation. So, and I think they've known that their funding is going to change, but they've elected to have they've elected to create their business or their project in such a way that they now have, at the end of their project, they have staff that are at risk. Okay, there's other ways that they could have structured their projects so that the continuity of funding was not so. Well, it's continuity of funding not so relevant or not as important. Having said that, these organisations have been doing awesome mahi, and they've been making impression on the landscape, and they're working for the environment. So we've got to be careful that they don't disappear. But I think the level of support, we have to be really cautious around the level of support, particularly when it's unbudgeted expenditure for something that's come to us in the last month. That's my
Thank
comments.
you. Alexa.
I completely agree with you about taking care on how we proceed with this and around contestability and so on. I totally agree with that. I fundamentally disagree that these organisations should have to operate as a business and figure out their continuity of funding when they're doing our work. I just want to put that on the table.
Yep. Sorry, Councillor No, and then Scott.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just picking up on this point regards to the next two items, and I think we need to be mindful of that. These two focus on Waiwanaka and the Golden Pines project. Both projects have been well established in advance of COVID, so they haven't just sprung up with jobs for nature. So I think we need to be mindful of that. They've existed in advance of that. Because of our LTP focus and legislative responsibilities in terms of the way we run those processes, I feel that we can't advance these two funding applications this year. I think we need to send a clear signal that we're in this space with them, and we need to be shoulder to shoulder, do everything we can within existing budgets to ensure that they are there at the end of 23-24, ideally fully staffed and able to do what they're doing. So I think we've got to somehow find a way to get them through. But I just want to flag another part of this. As we move to the LTP discussions. I think in terms of biosecurity and biodiversity, I think we need to seriously look at a targeted rate across the region to help fund these sorts of activities, because we need to make the most of the opportunity that exists. We fundamentally exist because of the environmental responsibilities that we have. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to put more resource into this space in the future. We somehow need to get over this hurdle in the next 12 months to ensure that all these partners, stakeholders are there with us in 12 months' time when we nail the LTP.
Yep. Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I take Lloyd's point in terms of the structuring of the business, and that's their responsibility. But I also agree with Alexa, I think where she's coming from, that, you know, in terms of environmental outcomes, I'm assuming we need these organisations doing this type of work. And so we need to ensure that they're sustainable to some degree, or maybe my words aren't quite correct, but for me, my key point is these are LTP discussions. You know, my feeling is we're maxed out at 18%. These are LTP. We need to really go through slowly and consider each application. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm much the same. Whether they've started prior to Jobs for Nature or through Jobs for Nature, they've made avail of central government funding that was there for a reason. They've elevated or grown to an extent that matched that, and by and large are doing a very positive role, and it would be great to be able to maintain it and continue it, but we need to see longevity from them. We need to see long-term business plans. We need to, if the thinking is that we suddenly become the funder for this, then we have to give this an awful lot more scrutiny than what we're giving here today. And we look at our eco fund and the very small amounts that go out to multiple groups and the scrutiny that goes into those. There's a lot more work to be done here. So, while I'm very supportive of what these groups do, I think we have a lot more to do to be able to consider that.
Thank you. Councillor Somerville.
I guess it's this thing about how can we enable sustainability, continuity of the service that different groups offer, and we heard that from Matt Hollier this morning, and in that paper that's referred to there. Now that's all about long-term plan stuff, of course, and I think we do really need to put a lot of thought into that, and maybe there is a different way of doing it. Now that doesn't help in terms of these annual plan requests, but I think I'm having to agree that the position we're in, we're not in the position to be able to offer to change the sort of financial decisions that we've already made around rates because of our responsibilities to our community.
Thank you. Councillor Mepham.
Just unmuting. Yes, look, my view on this too is that I think your target catchment communities, they're funded through a long-term plan and even in last year's annual plan, and that the request that's come through from Waiwanaka fits within their sort of administrative role. So that's my thinking on this.
Thank you. Councillor.
Can I just quickly add to that, in what, as I understand, target catchment community has not received a funding request from Waiwanaka.
Yeah, it's open at the moment. Yep. Thank you. Personally, I agreed entirely with what Councillor Noon said, and actually his comments were quite similar to other people's as well, but I was about to say just about exactly the same thing, that there are a few projects that and it's not to fund they're not even requesting or signalling it's for the whole project. It's the coordination aspect of that project over a bit of time that is actually really beneficial to our wider region, And actually, this work, I think, is the future of environmental management across New Zealand. We can't influence that. It's much bigger than us. It's happening. It's happening right across New Zealand. And we can either be part of it or not. We've got this problem. It's a national problem, actually. Yeah. Where we've created some amazing work. And now we've got this year where there's a lot of uncertainty before LTPs and us having a good chance to discuss where we're at and have proper business plans, exactly, Councillor Kelleher, and for us as well. So, yeah, I agree with Councillor Noon that we don't, and Councillor Summer, we don't have extra money, but, you know, we don't have heaps of extra money at all. We've already got an 18% signalled. So what can we do to ensure that these projects don't disappear by utilising existing budget and work programs? How can we work together? And that's probably difficult to hear for projects, but that's probably, I think, where we're at. Staff is, I know that's difficult where the governors, but is there anything that you would like to say in addition to that? Richard, staff?
No, look, my view is very much along the same lines. We haven't yet made the decision around the rates rise, so I think you pointed that out, Richard, and I think you do a rather good job of that. We've made a recommendation and that's the placeholder at the moment, but that decision potentially gets made at the next council meeting. However, we are looking at a significant rates increase, and my view isn't different from most of the councillors' comments. These people are doing fantastic work. Sometime in the future, and it'll be part of the LTP process, we might need to consider the possibility of funding some of this work locally rather than through central government. But the challenge right now is we're unlikely to have the available monies in the last year of our current long-term plan, and because we weren't expecting these requests, and secondly, it's quite challenging to consider them as ad hoc requests when we haven't really opened up any opportunity for people to apply for funding through other parts of such as other workers. I think Lloyd explained extremely well. There are other groups using Jobs and Nature funding as well, some of whom are also trying to survive at the moment and stretch out that funding so that maybe we can make the end of the next financial year. So my view is very similar to yours, actually, would be my position.
Richard?
So just on that comment, Gretchen, about using existing plans or existing work programs. So we have, and we still are, it's not something we have an answer for today, looking for opportunities that utilise the skills that some of these groups have got to help us deliver our work program. So we obviously contract amounts of work around the region, and we've still got procurement policies, and we've got to make sure, you know, we've got existing relationships with other suppliers, but there may be opportunities for some of our work to engage some of Waiwanaka, for example, or Southern Lakes or others, skills to deliver pieces of work for that form part of our broader work plans. So it's not a concrete thing at the moment, but it's certainly another option we've got where we don't have the headroom in the budget to just make a grant to these groups.
Okay, that sounds good and sensible and very much what we were talking about. Yep. Councillor Scott, then McCall.
Oh, what I took out of that was, so there's some potential for some of these groups to get funding if they're aligned with our.
Yeah, the difference is it wouldn't be funding as such as a grant. We would actually be paying them to undertake work that fits with our work program. So it's a different sort of funding to what they're seeking, but it is still funding for them.
Oh, thank you. My question is just as a matter of interest in terms of wrapping up this financial year, like if our finance director said, actually, we've got a bit of an underspend, we might be able to use that separate to our 18%, separate to everything else, to just help some of these organisations temporarily across the line. So can I ask a question? How are things financially in terms of this year? Or is everything tracking as has been previously indicated?
So the current, if you're talking about the current year that we're in right now, you're well aware of the fact that we had a deficit budget to start with, and then I brought to you at the end of the first quarter a request for additional funding, deficit funding. So we're actually tracking badly for this current financial year in terms of our bottom line, and we will end up with a budget which will underperform the one that was signed off last year. So, so it's not been a good financial year for us. In terms of next year, again, our view is, we were keen not to end up with a rates increase of 18%, but we couldn't find any other savings. So my view is there are no savings in the upcoming budget that would bring us to something lower than 18%.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. Just through you to Richard. I was just a wee bit of clarification, Richard, on what you're saying there before. So basically what you're saying is there may be project funding via our existing budgets, be it via our implementation team or communications or some other area within the ORC.
That's right.
Where our outcomes align with the group's outcomes.
Yeah, that's right. And which in any normal course, we might be either contracting out or deliver it in-house, but currently have vacancies, but still want to complete the work, so we can undertake it on a contract basis.
So that makes absolute sense.
And that's a could, and it would be on a case by case.
It's a could, and is still being worked through by a number of teams. It's an option we have.
Something to look at. Yep, councillor known.
I'll just add that, and I'm not a staff member, but in the discussions that we've had with Wai Wanaka over a number of years, they have suggested that type of alignment with us. So yeah, that's great. If it develops,
that's the
great
conversation.
Good one. Okay, well, we've got a good signal there, I think, so we can probably move on.
So,
A similar-ish one.
yeah, I take the discussion applies to.
Is there anything different for this one then, or is it a similar feeling?
I don't think it's any different from a staffing perspective. I do have to say that, these organisations are doing amazing work, and this becomes part of our LTP discussion in terms of the way that we facilitate outcomes without always having to do the work ourselves. And that's the point I was keen to make. So alongside of what Richard was just suggesting in terms of what might be available in next year's budget in terms of contracting work, certainly in the longer term process, council needs to consider the possibility of working with community groups, and the way that's being suggested here, and it may be the way that we want to consider rating in the future around funding these types of organisations rather than doing this work ourselves.
Thank you. Are there any further staff comments at all? Gavin, you're okay? Yep.
Yes, I just note that this council has supported this group forming, and it's at a point now where I understand it can move to a delivery phase. So the advantages of some funding would be to maintain that momentum. And if there wasn't the funding from whatever source, they would lose that momentum and might go backwards compared to where they've got to just now. So I kind of think this is a little bit different to the other ones in that respect. There is a risk there of not maintaining the gains to be made in terms of forming the group to this point.
Can I comment on that?
Sure, yep.
This group has just joined our Wilding, our regional Wilding group. We haven't had a meeting with them yet, but they will likely show up to the next one. And certainly the regional group is really keen to support them and help them get up and running. There's a lot of work to be done. And I really welcome Gavin's thoughts on that and think we should consider this.
Thank you. Yeah. Everyone's sort of mulling that over, I think, so you go, Lloyd, and we'll keep thinking.
Can I just give a wee bit more background on the regional wilding group? Is that, I assume is that a structured group or is it?
Yeah, it's a structured group. It has to, maybe you should explain it, Gavin. Well, actually, it has to deal with the funding. We have to, it's part of our arrangement with the NPI. We sit between the NPI and DOC funding. And so that group has to come together and we have to oversee it, which we do.
So, yeah, I see this as a little bit different because once again, to me, this looks like a group that's being encouraged to get together by ourselves. And so we're sort of nearly, so we've encouraged them to do it. So to get them going, and I think, and they're still in the establishment phase. So I think this is one that would be more likely to support to get them to continue because we've already started them. So it's not about all of a sudden their group's been going and then all of a sudden they're coming to us as like the last resort person for funding. This is like, we can put support into them continuing their work that we basically started with them. So I'm a wee bit more positive around this one.
Councillor Scott.
Did they apply to the Eco Fund round? Because I would have thought that they would. Yeah, to answer your question.
Do we
Gavin.
know the answer to
The answer
that?
is no, they didn't.
Well, that's disappointing, isn't it?
Yes, so I've sought some advice around whether they would have been eligible. Because the way it's shaping up, and we're bringing a paper to you in 2 weeks for approving the Eco Fund, is it was looking like that will be undersubscribed
Okay, well, there you go. There's,
by a similar amount.
so there's your opportunity.
All right, yeah, Richard.
Yeah, I just had that quick chat to Gavin, and I agree, Brian. I think that is the opportunity. And I just note too that they're asking for 50% of that 60K,
Yeah.
and that is subject to QRDC funding. So given that we believe that, and still to be confirmed, that they would have been eligible had they applied, and that balance may be available through the Eco Fund, subject to that decision in 2 weeks, if they were to receive that other 50% and therefore be reliant on our 50% to undertake that work, and the funding is available, and we did encourage them to form in the first place, I think it would be a sensible move to look at that under allocation of the Eco Fund to support this one.
Just one.
Sorry, yeah, Gary and then Alexa.
Oh, it's just a clarification with the about the wilding conflict, the regional control group, and that group was set up. It had to set up to meet for the duration of the MPI funding, the big 10 million that they put into the region. So the Ministry of Primary Industries national funding, but it may or may not continue now but the funding hasn't actually dried up. It's just mostly gone. So the group will continue, I should think. And also there's a lot of different stakeholders in it, from federated farmers to forestry to all sorts of people, as well as the actual control groups themselves. Just hope that might help.
Sounds like an application would be able to flesh out the detail that we may need as well, to be able to understand that as well, and whether there are other avenues or not. So a further application type phase might be helpful. Councillor Callagher.
Oh, look, I was just going to concur with the sentiments that we've evolved to from Mr. Saunders. I mean, we're talking 60K. Am I correct in saying that it's 60K of work completes that area? Is that the
30K?
No, but it's 60K
But it's 50% of that.
but $60,000 controls the area. They're saying there's $60,000 worth of work to do there, or are they saying there's $60,000 of put an administrator in place?
I don't have that detail, but I think that's something we would need to establish in terms of how the money is actually being spent. Is it spent on actual removing trees or some project management?
Because as I read that, it's $60,000 to undertake control in that area.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a no-brainer that we would not support that to the extent of, especially when it's 50%. That could be all the control that's needed in that area.
Good.
And that further application and putting that together will be helpful. So,
Exactly.
if that works out as an avenue. Yep. All right. Sounds like we've come to a bit of a end point for that one at this stage. Yep. Thanks.
Thank you.
What's the time? 12:30. So lunch will be there soon, but should we grab one more then that's in a similar pool?
Yeah, look, I won't say any more on this. I think if you've heard from us this morning, just to keep referring to the advice that, or the paper that went through in September around this. So it appears to be a looming policy type decision.
Right, yeah, so it is for this annual plan. Okay, similar scenario.
It seems, Madam Chair, that particularly with the reference from the staff paper for that September, the policy that needs to be developed to prioritise these sorts of requests in the future needs to be developed. Obviously, the council's request and the amount of money we're talking about. It's not chicken feed, it's LTP discussion as well.
Thank you, councillor Noon. Well led off. Very difficult though, isn't it, when you know the value of these projects, yeah, and the synergies they create. Yep.
I'm sure you can link to this discussion in your letter to the minister.
Yes, that's right. It could well be one of my case studies if we use that approach. Exactly.
Holding babies.
Mm. Okay, no one else wants to comment. Councillor Scott?
Yeah, as was saying before, I believe this is an LTP discussion, but is it 500K per year or 500K total over 3 years?
Yeah, so it's 300K for this annual,
Yeah.
and then 500 per annum for the next 10
Okay,
years. So
that'd be
the-
good to see that,
yeah, we're talking about, yeah, LTP. 500K.
Yeah, really tough
Per annum,
decision
which is, you know,
for
5
us to
so-
make on these. But the right one, I think we have to make to be strategic and look at this right across the region. Yeah. Councillor Callaghan.
Yeah, I concur. LTP discussion. I don't think we can fit it in here.
Thank you. Yep. Lloyd.
Yeah, I just concur with the sentiment, but I would just like to say that I think the Southern Lakes Sanctuary are like doing an awesome job, and it's a model that's gotten up and going running, and they're doing awesome work. But we just, at the end of the day, we just can't just keep writing checks right now. So it needs to go into a framework so that we can get our funding lines sorted to balance up where our expenditure needs to go. And unfortunately, there is a timing difference just right at the minute. But I think we know that they're there, and we can support them however we can, other than writing a check. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Sorry, and my comments I made earlier was actually was on this one, so I've moved my
They were relevant to the other one too,
those
so you
comments-
didn't need to
it
tell
may
us
have been
that.
relevant to the Pines one, but it was actually specifically with relation to this one, which I was looking at on my computer at the time. So look, I'm with everyone else. These people are doing an unbelievably fantastic job, and that's the issue. And over time, that might be the model that we look at into the future, but it's an LTP discussion.
Yeah, absolutely right. This one is amazing, I think, as well, in terms of the fact that it directs where volunteer effort goes to get the best outcomes for the environment, rather than a whole lot of projects ad hoc working away the coordination to pull that together and get the best synergies. And there's other projects that are achieving that as well. So we do understand that. And yeah, we'll certainly be keeping relationships going, and we'll certainly be looking at existing work streams that we have, and how can we partner as best we can whenever we can, how can we contract when we can, how can we ensure that this work keeps going, because it's something that we need into the future. Richard?
I'll just say too, in relation to these, one of the things that they're looking for is that continuity through the long-term plan, because they have that uncertainty at the moment, which subsequently creates uncertainty for staff, and they end up looking for other opportunities. So I think what I just stressed to council is the importance of delivering some early direction publicly through our long-term plan discussions that will give these groups some confidence about the direction we're heading and the opportunities that will exist for them through years 1, 2, 3 of the new long-term plan. Because while nothing's going to be in concrete until you approve that LTP, in June 2024, the sort of strength of the messaging and direction that you give through the consultation document and through any public comments that are made will give them some confidence in terms of their own planning and their own staff retention. So there are some really important things that we can do as an organisation through our early LTP discussions and the signing off of the draft document, which we'll be talking about that time frame this afternoon. So just things to keep in mind there that will assist them in the really tough job they're going to have through 23-24 to plan to retain some of that key workforce.
That's such good.
Yeah, you're so right. I was about to say something very similar actually around the fact that we're starting LTP planning really early for a reason, so we can be strategic. But as part of that, having early discussions with key groups, community as well, external engagement as part of that process more than ever before, so that we can get valuable data, I suppose, that enables us to make really good proposals, I suppose, that then go out for genuine consultation. So yeah, that's definitely part of the process, and these groups would be able to feed in data too. Yep, Councillor Wilson.
On that basis, and thank you, that's a really wonderful concept, is that I'm not sure what our timetable is for site visits or meetings elsewhere, but I think if we indicated sooner than later, we can't do much at this meeting, but we can indicate that we intend to have a meeting up in that area and do a site visit to understand those projects better to inform the long-term plan. And that in itself wouldn't be a bad message. And I'm just wondering if it's something
we can definitely talk about that this afternoon when we go through the program and where that might fit it, and then give a steer to these groups that that's the commitment being made.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Good idea. Okay, sorry, but Council
Very quickly, just that what Richard has just said enables groups to go out and fill that short-term gap with philanthropy, sausage sizzles, whatever it takes. If they have that idea that they are being taken seriously for the long term.
values, yeah.
Subscriptions.
Whatever.
Great discussion. Thank you. It doesn't make it easy for any of us in the meantime, does it? Yeah.
300,000 sausages.
Okay, so what's the next one? Sorry, I'm back on the job.
So quite a specific request from the Otago Fish and Game Council, wanting us to prioritise the Clutha Lagoon as an enhancement project for the senior plan period.
Specific project, yeah.
Yeah, and it sort of feels like it might have sort of come from left field, really. It's the feedback I've had from staff, given that we've had our key projects that we are,
Possibly not an urgent matter for us to, well, I don't know, we'll get some staff input, but whether it's there's an opportunity at the moment that we must react to it in this annual plan. I doubt it, but it might be, versus having a think about similarly, what types of restoration activities might we want to do or not do in the long-term plan. So yeah, perhaps we'll go straight to staff on, are we missing anything here?
Yes, it's in the Ford program, 2-year project starting 2025.
Right.
It's not a small one, it's a couple of mil. So it's not the kind of thing you can get into quickly, but it's certainly on the Ford program, and I wouldn't recommend advancing it.
Sure. Richard?
And I've done, Mike has spoken directly with staff, so the feedback he's got is what he's got from staff, but I know this has been on the radar with compliance and engineering in terms of managing an existing problem and interpreting our rules in a way that allow for it to be managed while this work done that Gavin's talking about for a few years' time. So staff do know about this, and it's on the radar for a couple of years, and I think this just speaks to this whole process where groups are trying to bring their priorities forward for us to consider.
Yep, you can understand that as well. Yep. Okay. Brian, did you have your hand
No,
up?
I
You
answered
okay?
the question.
Yep.
Thank
Look,
you.
I'm interested in that response, and I just want to make sure we're really clear that it may be in our long-term plan for 2026, but the prioritization project may change that in the long-term plan. And so I don't want them to hang definitely 2026 either. And so I think we just need to be clear about that, because that may
I would
change.
suggest we'll see a similar submission in about a year's time.
Or possibly 9 months.
There's still quite a few there. Does it make sense to have lunch, or shall we churn through them?
Lunch is always a good idea.
I think a working lunch would be. Do staff,
Grab lunch.
We've got 2 hours for this, so we were always anticipating having a break. So have we got the time to do that, do you think?
Order for lunch.
Can we just have a working lunch?
Sorry.
I haven't seen the agenda
No.
either in terms of the workshop, and I know there was discussion with Richard.
Sorry, this is slide two, but we'll sort this out so that people who are live can figure out whether it's now or
Well, how
not.
far we planned to have for lunch, was that planned in there and the time we've got available?
No, look, this was, we didn't, it's hard to say how long this part of the process takes. So nominally, we had allocated sort of 2 hours, 30 to 45 minutes, and then an hour and a quarter to an hour and a half. So there wasn't a dedicated time for lunch. We were just going to fit
Okay,
it in
cool.
between
Very
parts
nice.
of the workshops. But I mean, my suggestion for a workshop is that a working lunch would be
Yep,
the way to go. 'Cause
perfect.
we have got a lot to
Yep.
cover today if
Yes,
we want to have
yeah.
a good discussion around the LTP part of this workshop.
Which is a
Okay.
key part of today, so I think it worked much too.
Perfect. Well, let's grab 5 minutes then to grab our lunches and come back so we could stop live streaming for a little bit. could we?
We'll keep the meeting in the waiting room, so if you
Thank you.
just put everyone in the time there.
Thanks, everyone.
No. One. Not yourself.
It tells you online. I did sit through a fair few council meetings.
Yep. Right.
And live ones last year.
All right, we're live and we are back. So we are up to, we've done Otago Fish and Game Council request. Dunedin Tracks Network, I think. Just share the screen in a moment.
Diagrams in our papers.
Yeah, I'm just, yeah, we're just, for the people who are online, we're all on the same page, literally, in a moment. We're just setting that up.
This is not the slide, is it? This one you want to start with, because the other one is saved on the desktop.
So we had public forum of this yesterday as well. It's provided probably a bit more info. No. That's the room. Yes. No, that's yeah. Yeah. Up to you, I think. Yeah. Okay, sorry everyone, we're all organised, we're ready to go. Dunedin Tracks Network, who presented in public forum yesterday as well.
Okay, cool. So we'll just jump. Yeah, so look, I put this in here because I'm not. There's no actual number associated with this that I saw, but there's certainly a suggesting there's some funding implications and what they seem to be asking for or requesting.
Part of 50K total is shared.
Yeah, they did. They asked for co-funding an agreement with DCC 50K, looking for coordinator for but that was a verbal presentation, which you're right, Mike, it's quite different from
right. Okay, yeah,
this, which is
I wasn't
quite
aware
illegal.
wasn't aware of that number. Yeah, so co-funding Tracks Network. I suspect it sounds like the project manager role that they're suggesting here. To working to build and maintain the network, and then enabling and support the development of shared trails leading to and running beside waterways, which is where we come in with our stop bank networks, and then the sort of open-ended continue to work with Dunedin. ORC continues to work with Network Trust on off-road shared path between Wingatu and Waiholder. So it's really, seems to be requesting us to really step into that space more than potentially just providing some asset for use. That's my interpretation of it, but I hope,
Yep. Kate and Brian, just noting that Councillor Kelleher has pulled his chair back from the table too, because it's hard to see that when you're online. Yep, Kate.
Thank you. I think my concern here is the response, not so much as the funding, and I understand the problem with the funding. I think this has been a project that has been put into one silo and kept there, rather than thinking about what this can be delivering. And it's just, I'm going to sound grumpy, because I'm frustrated that here is a project that in part wants to use some infrastructure that will do our job for climate change and actually considerations of improving that just gets, there's no funding. Yesterday we had a project that had this department or parts of this department looking at something that is something that's wonderful to do, but has been prioritised by staff, not by us, or we in part by us as a project. But there's no nimbleness to say, actually, this is something we can get a delivery for a bigger, wider range of people, potentially looking at some funding for it. I don't know. I just think we're dealing with some of the stuff in silos, and this is green. I'm going to blame you, Chair, for sending Iffy off to talk to me the other day about green infrastructure. And one of the problems with when you look at green infrastructure is we should be looking at dual purpose things. And this is a potential with some of this part of this work, is looking at the dual purpose and the sharing of the benefits and the whole rates review that we need to do of flood scheme infrastructure. This should never be dealt with just by engineers or with the funding within that, but it should be part of our climate change work. It should have some input from the ratings review work and a whole lot of other things, and that nuance is completely missed in this response. So sounding cross, not really, I understand the issue, but we have to be more nimble about thinking about how we respond to these communities and appreciating that some of these people, again, like those previous groups who talked about, are actually doing a fantastic job addressing some of the big issues that it is our role to address. Sorry, rant over. Sorry, the CEO missed it.
One thing I'm wondering, because it is a public record, that we staff are deciding to do projects that we haven't agreed to.
Sorry,
yep.
We haven't understood the full implications of our budget because we couldn't see them, and I made that very clear yesterday.
Okay. Yeah, one exactly. I can't remember the exact issue, but anyway, it's something different to this, so that's all fine.
Okay.
Yep,
well,
Councillor Scott.
I'm going to have a possibly more moderate sort of perspective. So I acknowledge the work that staff have already been doing in the background in terms of access between Waihola and Dunedin. And I've read the feasibility study for that work, and it seems to me there's light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the potential for using as stopbacks, for this trial, and that the bottom two bullet points enable and support the development of shared trails leading to running beside the waterways, including the OSC stop peak networks, and the next one continue the work with the Dunedin Tracks Network Trust. That if this council can just work on that within existing budgets and support that. I cannot prejudge what the outcome will be, but I'm hopeful that we will actually achieve what many of us want to achieve. So to just do that within existing budgets and take it on the chin that co-funding of project managers is done by somebody else. Because I think if we can deliver our responsibility on those bottom two bullet points, we will have done something pretty special.
Yep, sorry, who was next? You, Andrew. Sorry, and then Alexa.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've got a similar view to Brian. We had a discussion around this table 12, 18 months ago, and we agreed that in this track development space that we would be where we could offer existing infrastructure to be an enabler providing the infrastructure I'm referring to as flood infrastructure, providing that any public access units can feed that infrastructure that was there, obviously to protect either farmland or residential activity or whatever. So we agreed to be an enabler, and the way I see those last two bullet points, why can't they continue on? We've got the resource to continue those conversations with the Intrix Trust, Network Trust. And the first two, I think we're pretty much there, although we haven't probably absolutely committed ourselves to the vision of a world-class network. We've already agreed in our PTP the importance of connectivity across the region, and now that we've got a public and active transport committee, we're talking about various modes of transport. So we're already in that space. What the second bullet point seems to be logically that we work in collaboration with this organisation to ensure to help to find those or fulfil those gaps that currently exist. So the 4 bullet points there, continue that good work. The co-funding becomes an LTP focus. So I agree with Brian. Long-winded way to put it, but sorry.
Rightio, thank you, Andrew. That was really useful. Alexa.
Thanks, Andrew. I agree with Brian and Andrew too, but I would like to, so I won't repeat what you've said, but I'm worried about the attitude that I'm seeing in bullet point and the A point on there. The ORC role regarding amenity recreation services. This is a transport service. Recreation is an amenity is a wonderful byproduct of it, but actually we are putting together an active transport network all the way for the purpose of transport, be that to get to work, to go and see friends, to do a bike trail between Dunedin and Queenstown airports, doesn't matter.
So which one did you object to, Alexa?
I'm looking at this key request up on the screen. Is that not what we're trying to talk about? And I just think that we have made it difficult for the Dunedin Tracks network. We are dragging our feet around the use of our flood banks, and they should be dual purpose. We don't need to fund them, they'll fund the funds. I know they've asked for some elsewhere, but they will. We just need to enable them. And I'm talking about the slide that's on the screen. I realise that Andrew's talking about some bullet points in their submission.
I hadn't realised, because we need staff resource plans. So that's inconsistent with what am I looking at the wrong thing here?
The submissions are in the dark blue. The light blue are the count is the
You're on to the next page and you'll see it. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Right, slide 13.
Okay, well, I
Yeah.
disagree with no staff resources plan. That's not right.
it's a bad message.
It's a bad message. It's a go away and do it yourself message. Not right.
Yeah. Is it urgent at this point though versus a more strategic think about the LTP? Lloyd.
I just concur with Andrew and Brian. Alexa, I think at the end of the day, I think this should be business as usual. And as a council, part of our mandate is to work and enable our communities. And part of our mandate is also public and active transport. So we should be partnering very much with our communities in creating infrastructure that is fit for purpose for the community. The fact that it's on a stop bank is, it's not, like at the end of the day, I think it's not just, if it was they're wanting to put a track aside or a wetland or something, we should be partnering with them as well. So we need to be partnering with our community because that's how we get our support. And I just want to mention one little story because I like telling stories. But when we're in Taranaki, we went for a drive, and up in Taranaki, I can't remember the name of the parks, McGregor Park or something like that. But this is this awesome park in the middle of nowhere that you walk through, and it's got barbecue stuff and event stuff, and that is owned and run by the Taranaki Regional Council. And it was just such a feel good. Everybody you talk about it, such a feel good thing because at the end of the day, it's all about creating our connections and our community responsibility. So I think we should be working with the Dunedin Tracks Trail as part of our existing budgets,
Yes.
within engagement and within engineering and within whatever departments it takes, and that we should be working in a positive way to enable the establishment of infrastructure that fits into our mandate of providing for our communities and for public transport.
All right, Tim is there wanting to speak. Then we'll go to staff comment for whether we're missing anything as to why we aren't going into a lower level of detail after having done a high level one. Yep, Tim.
Yeah, look, I'm just the same as everyone else. I want to support what's been said already. I do think the Dunedin Tracks network is really valuable. So once again, within existing budgets for this period, 23-24. And I really can't see why we shouldn't be able to use the flood banks for these purposes. So yeah, that's just my couple of cents worth. Thanks.
Yeah, don't think anyone's saying that we aren't using them or not wanting to, and we have done a high level investigation. But I guess the question is, do we need to be doing a more detailed investigation as part of this annual plan? Do we, and the other thing was verbally, whether we need it to be part, what was asked for yesterday orally was around coordination, which is a different thing entirely.
I mean, the problem is the response. I think that if the response had been written in a way that we support the concept, and as transport providers, we support the Dunedin Tunnels Trails, Dunedin Trails Tracks Network and their ambitions, that we do have some assets that we could work with. At the moment, we don't have funding for the coordination role, but we're happy to continue to work collaboratively. I would have been happy with the response, but that's,
Mike.
Look, I'll take that on board. That's my nuancing. I've been pretty covering a lot of bases, so I'll take the bad for that. What I will say though is the issue, and it's touching on what Alexa was saying, is that there's possibly discussions, strategic ones, and possibly aligned with the land transport planning process around the ORC's role with, let's say, transport infrastructure. Because Gavin will probably jump in and correct me here, but I'm not sure that we have a role in building transport infrastructure at the moment. But hey, that's not to say that might change, which is, I don't know, what you might be thinking, Alexa, with regards to this sort of stuff. And I think that's what this advice is reacting to, is that broader, where are we going? Because the trust is saying, hey, we've got a regional role here, there's a regional perspective, and that's something new, I think, and that's really what this was trying to put in front of you. So my apologies for the clumsiness of that, but that's the intent there from staff.
Certainly from my perspective, there's nothing I've heard that I wouldn't entirely agree with in terms of council's comments. So, I'm not going to hang Mike out to dry, because I think he's done a stunning job of pulling together staff responses here. So I'll wear it just as much as you will. At the end of the day, we're getting a clear steer from council members, and it's a steer that I support.
So what is the steer then, that we're going to continue to work? So I've heard mainly around stop banks, but also active transport. The steer is we'd like to be in that space, but is it just stop banks? Isn't this more of a strategic LTP and regional land transport matter that we need to give consideration to, quite similar to what we've talked about with environmental ICM community type approach? But in the meantime, so what are we signalling? That we do want to be working with keeping communication going. Where did we get to?
Yeah, we've got a transport role, that we've got a infrastructure role, and we want to be kept in the loop. We don't have finances this year, right. Although I am going to, and I was going to do it under buses, because we don't seem to have buses in here as an issue. I am really concerned after yesterday's, we've got several submissions on them. So can I raise it now? I'm really concerned after all the stuff that is happening in the public transport space, which is hard to get your head around and is requiring us to be right at the front end. We've got a new regional passenger transport plan required under a new model, not PTOM. We need to do a regional land transport committee. We've got a whole lot of reactive stuff we're doing on buses rather than proactively planning. I don't think we've got the numbers budgeted for the transport team. We've got the easiest, lowest hanging fruit for carbon change, for climate change mitigation, and we're not in that space. And I'm really concerned, and so that's going to come.
So we might flag that on the other matters that are at the end.
Can we finance more? But because that would give us a resource, part and part, to look at that.
We'll come back to talking about that one.
Okay, sorry.
Yep, the note, good, thanks. Yep, Brian.
Yeah, cool. So the presentation yesterday actually talked about a few different things: Homeroo to Dunedin, Waihola to Wingatui to Middlemarch. But my view, for whatever it's worth, is that we need to do justice to the one proposal where there's a feasibility from Waihola to Dunedin. We've already done a certain amount of work And we need to see some of that through in terms of to keep some momentum there, the staff time. In terms of the bigger picture trail thing, I'm actually quite happy for that to be an LTP thing.
So is there any staff time and existing budget essentially similar to the other one that we talked about, which is, jobs for nature type projects? Don't know, that isn't something we've, at the moment, we're just hearing that there isn't anything there and we'd be squeezing some extra time out of people essentially.
I mean, Kate's just made some comments around transport staff, so my gut feeling is that we can probably find some, with an existing staffing budget, we can probably find some opportunity to support this. But because I'm not going to be managing the budget next financial year, maybe.
I guess it's understanding what we're supporting clearly as well, which I think is something to do with keeping a relationship going rather than doing specific projects like a detailed plan for the stock banks.
So shoulder here, but the tangible request they made was for this, the part funding of a project management resource. So
Yes.
that's where they want some cash between us and potentially the TLAs. So that's one thing. And then I think the balance of the requests they're making can be managed within what we're already doing. With the message, we're going to need to have some continued conversation about what our position on it is. But these projects aren't quick. We're not going to need money in the next annual plan year to start building trails or even detailed designs. These things take a long time, and they've done a lot of really good early work on this, but there's still a lot that needs to happen before it got to the stage where they were looking for significant funding. So there's things we can do with the expertise we've got to support that project to continue to move, whether it be Dunedin Waihola, which is slightly further advanced, or some of those other ones. I think the critical question here from yesterday is actually around, do we want to put cash towards the project management piece? Or are we saying, at this stage, no, but we will continue to support you out of our existing staff resources and expertise on the different components of the project?
Yeah, and we've got our working group type models going with our TAs too in public and active transport. So given that it's sort of a discussion raised by these guys around us working with the DCC on that might be a good place for us to start and discussing. But at this moment, well, my feeling is we haven't from this discussion said, yes, we do want to put money in towards a coordinator. Lloyd.
Well, I just think, I just want to go back. I've only been here for 8 or 9 months, but obviously this has been on the table for a while because it's been talked about a few times while I've been here. And at the end of the day, it's a simple request that they want to be able to build a trail from Waihola to Mosgiel. They think the best opportunity might be the use of some of our infrastructure. And I think we should be working with them to find, actively and positively working with them to find a plan for a cycle trail to go from A to B. And rather than just putting it in the too hard basket all the time. And I think I think we should be doing that as business as usual. And now the other request is for funding for a project manager, which I think is a different story because are we going to be funding somebody to are we going to be funding somebody to be negotiating with ourselves?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So,
Exactly, yeah.
and I think we should be big enough that we should be able to actually take a positive approach to it.
Yeah.
So the other thing we're missing is and it wasn't answered yesterday, is what's the proposal for this project manager? It wasn't firm in terms of like I understand the process that they'll go through, but I think part of working with them alongside the DC others is to firm up exactly what those next steps are and what it is they need a project manager for, and therefore what it would cost. So if I was council, I'd be instructing staff to continue to work positively on the project with the Trails Trust and determine at the appropriate time whether funding can be provided to support project management from existing budgets, because it won't be a lot of money once we get to that point, and it'll actually be a few months down the track anyway.
Very good. Yeah. Kate.
Thank you, and I'm really liking the way this is going. I didn't ever envisage putting money in. It's just giving positive feedback to these people, which was certainly
Absolutely,
lacking. But
yeah.
I do think there's one opportunity where, as we do work, to have in the back of our mind that this where they want to be, and seeing whether we can proactively, in the way we are doing some upgrades on that trail, saying if there are spaces that's not going to cost us any more, but we're working in that area, saying can we deliver or consider that in the design. And I think that bit is completely missing because we haven't got a joined up thinking on it yet. And that's partly because the plans are only just evolving. But again, part of that opportunity was to say, can we minimise the cost by front-footing this as we do work?
Yep, Alexa.
I think that you're saying that you've heard this come up a few times since you've been elected. Well, this is one of the first groups that got in touch with me when I was elected in 2019. And they have been trying to get permission to use our stock banks for to construct cycleways on top of them for a long time. They've now got a really good report into them, and we know where the problems are and where they aren't. And I think they just need to get a signal that we're still supportive. Let's move on. Let's figure out how we make this work. And I think Richard's response was spot on. But we need to work with them, and that will take some staff time, and that will need to come into the transport area as well as the engineering, because obviously it's their stock banks, right? And Public and Active Transport Committee should be picking this up.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Oh, sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, I want to go back to that question because I think there's still doubt in our mind as governance and also as staff. Staff are looking for a clear direction about what is our role in terms of, and I won't even use amenity and recreation services, but in terms of connectivity for transport modes across the region. So I look back and, when I hear that, no, we're not in the space, I look back and who triggered the Dunedin to Ravensbourne cycleway walkway, who built the river track from Clyde to Alexandra. We've done this in the past, but I think what we need to do is our high-level strategic documents need to have a really clear direction that, yes, we're serious about providing and enabling this type of these types of connections. And so if we've got that, we then clarify that question between ourselves and staff, because it's not clear at the moment, and we need to ensure that those strategic documents clearly reflect our vision going forward. So I think that's the number one step we need to deal with. That's obviously LTP discussion as well. But I'll go back to the original, continue those 4 bullet points that staff are working on now, and the financial aspect rolls over to the LTP.
Thanks. And I think staff led with some good comments as well around who does have the legislative responsibility, and then the funding levers that can be pulled towards these as well. So some good discussion there. I don't know, Nick, I think it was you who said something along those lines, but just who is responsible for transport type projects. But do we have a role in the future? We need to talk about that. And like you said, the regional land transport plan. Exactly. We'll put our position in those and we'll see where we get to. At the moment, it's too early for us to be able to put money into things. However, we've seen a really good signal, fantastic work that the Dunedin Tracks Network, and right across actually Otago too. I guess that's the other issue, that this isn't the only one of these fantastic trails networks that we've got. So looking at the bigger picture is important. Yep. Rightio. What do we got there then in summary? Richard basically summed that up, and hopefully we've got captured that. Next one.
So Federated Farmers came in with some pretty high level sort of feedback here, but I thought it was worthy of framing it in this workshop. I contacted them and we end up having quite an interesting conversation around this, which ended in them being pretty excited about our up and coming LTP and being part of that. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next workshop around how, there's an engagement part of that process. And so Fed farmers they just want to talk. They just want to be involved. Yeah. I mean, it's at a policy level here, right? And what we're spending and how we're spending our money and the policies around that, which is obviously part of the LTP, and you can see there'll be some transparency around that in the next workshop.
Thank you.
Well done. Okay. Yep.
Look, this is a huge opportunity. I get where Fed farmers are coming from, because it's not misinformation or it's not misunderstanding. I think we haven't yet been in the position to show a substantial amount of value. I will give Aquarius as one of those projects that was long in the coming and very expensive that has delivered really well. And I know that we're going to have a lot of other things that we deliver well for the rural communities. We just have to be able to tell that story better. And that's what that investment is that we put in and why. But I think, again, understanding, and I'm going to be boring, repetitive, and go on and on, that we need to show our forward work plans so people can see what we are doing and understand what we are trying to deliver. And until we get to that level of clarity in our plans, we are going to continue to get people frustrated because they don't know what we're spending the far increased rates on.
Thank you. Any other comments on Fed farmers? Simple annual general charges to reduce rates to rural communities. Right, there's the.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's
Ready
okay.
for the next
That's
one?
the suggested. That's good.
Yeah, right. Okay. So this really follows on from the Fed farmers comment. That there was no real detailed feedback around our fees and charges schedule, other than Business South and Fed farmers coming in again at a very high level general, which is what I was referring to in the last comment. And hence, and they've said, Fed farmers have said they're looking forward to engage on those matters. So that stands, and it's where the staff advice has come in there with keeping the fees and charges as you agreed back in February, and reconsidering this from a policy perspective in the LTP.
Yep. Right.
Yep.
Andrew.
I should know the answer to this, Mike or Nick. But do we have a page in our annual plan or our LTP that clearly identifies the split between public and private good for each activity, the main heading activities that we deliver in terms of our services? You understand what I'm saying? And I only reflect on this City Council. It's just a one-pager that it was recreational activities. It was like 90% public good, 10% private or something like that. I'll probably not be wrong. That was probably 100% public. Museums, 100% public. Dog fees or animal control. There was a split. Obviously, there was a private benefit, so he should have dog fees. So, do we have a page that reflects that split?
Not one page, multiple pages. Revenue and financing policy outlines that for each activity.
For each, so it sits after each activity at the end.
No, it sits as a separate one document, revenue and financing policy, but it breaks down who benefits, and then as a result of that, what we charge, whether it's 100% general rate or targeted rate or a split. That's all in that. Revenue and financing policy is probably dozen pages.
Okay. So in our annual plan, does it exist in the annual plan?
I think we leave it in the LTP. We don't re-include that in the annual plan. So
every 3 years, people would see that.
Yeah, but they can go see it any time, unless it changed. And if it changed, we would we'd have to. Well, you don't necessarily have to go through a consultation process for an RFP change unless it meets the significance requirement.
I'm not talking about change. I'm talking about visibility. So
so it's in the LTP. financial strategy, infrastructure strategy, RFP sitting in the LTP, but obviously they're core fundamental documents that continue through the subsequent APs, because APs is just basically, you know, a subset of your LTP.
Yeah.
That could be a strategic revisit in terms of principles going forward, and we've talked about that. Yep. Rightio, back to Federated Farmers. And yeah, that seems a sensible approach. Does anyone have anything different? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Callaghan.
Well, the only question I was going to ask, Mike, you said you had a discussion with both Otago and Southland, and so they've written their feedback or response. You had a discussion with them. Would they have written something different following if they had had that discussion beforehand? So from the discussion, you had said that they were they were more excited than what they understood previously.
I'd actually go back to Richard's earlier comments about the intent that organisations have when they're giving council submissions or feedback. It's bang on actually. Organisations are typically underlining what's of importance to them and just signalling that to us. And that's what Fed Farmers have done in their feedback. And I guess they're queuing you in on what you can look forward to in terms of the conversation coming up in the LTP.
Just add to that area. So it's because myself and Pim met with their chair at the time and exec. So they were very clear about submitting this year to council that they felt that the rate rise needed to be reconsidered before adoption. And that's the message that sent through in the feedback. But also, as Mike said, now we've had a further discussion with them about the process for the long-term plan and engaging in that process and some of the broader funding conversations, which is another thing that they're quite keen to be part of that process and to ensure they get a chance to submit on how the council generates its revenue in the future. So there's two parts to it. One is still absolutely on the table is their submission about the shares rates. But the other piece we've been able to flesh out a bit more with them, which is Mike's phone conversation and our discussion, is that ability for them to be involved in the long-term plan.
Cool, thank you. No, then I think my concern remained back then when we discussed fees and charges, because they are a direct on charge and they exponentially go up every year.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my concern remains that they are very high. And as they keep going up, those members of our ratepayers have to suffer that for whatever they're doing. Other than raising the concern, I'm not sure what else I can do.
Right.
Well, on that, I think that, and it's a long-term plan issue, and I'm sure they'll be onto it, that we need to be looking at mechanisms that we can provide for an easier system, as they have done with the intensive winter grazing to a certain extent. Yes, it's a new cost and it's $1,900 or about thereabouts with every application, but the staff have streamlined it to make it as easy as possible, and that you don't necessarily need to get a consultant in to do it. So I think that is that sort of stuff again, but it comes down to the messaging and the nuance when we do that yes, it's a charge, it's been given to us by government, but we can do it, we're making it as easy as possible and investing to make it as easy as possible. Again, that messaging doesn't necessarily, and the big opportunity with farm environment plans is how can we make that as simple as possible working with catchment groups to, have almost that, some parts of that written and available.
I totally concur with that.
This is the fees and charges component. Then there's the value that people receive from things that are non-recoverable as well, and that's been increasing. So that's another issue for our council. Who's the beneficiary of that? We have a different compliance strategy to the past, and a lot of what we do is non-recoverable. So there's that aspect to take into account as well. And so thanks as well, Councillor Wilson. We want our processes to be as engaging and as efficient and effective as possible. So So I guess there's two components there that will be long-term plan principles discussions again. We've got three matters here though. One is to implement various service cuts to reduce the rating requirement, and so far we haven't managed to identify some of them. Are there specific things that Federated Farmers have asked for there in terms of what we could cut? No.
No.
Okay, so we haven't got an actual proposal there either from this submitter. Well, not a submitter. Yeah, feedbacker. So yeah, we haven't got that. We've heard from Pim that he thinks it's pretty tight anyway, achieving what we've got in there. There's nothing that could be cut back. We've had that discussion so far, but we have got other matters, so we could come back to that one. To make immediate changes to funding policy, uniform annual general charge to reduce rates to rural communities seems to be something that would need quite a bit of discussion and thinking in a wider context. It's probably more of an LTP thing, as we said, to feds. I can see your hand up there too, Tim. And then we got the fees and charges. And yeah, I personally think that's an LTP discussion because there's a whole lot of factors in there about who benefits and the broader context that I just talked about as well, in terms of other services that aren't charged for that people are receiving. Yep. Okay, Tim, what do you think?
Just, I guess it's a question for Nick in terms of the annual plan for 23-24. The fees and charges for the 22-23 period was 6.8 million. What are they planned for in the 23-24 annual plan? Is there a change? Is there an increase?
Let's see if I've got that off the top of my head. I don't know, but see if I've got that. Fees and charges. Yes, they've actually, so fees and charges, yeah, 6.8 million in the AP, and they were going up in the long-term plan, but they actually dropped back in the annual plan to just under 6 million, 5.9. Part of that will be around, some of those changes we made around what was going into consent. So, around, we had those extra science staff and that, but yeah, so it's actually coming down. It was meant to be, we had it at almost 7.5 million in the LTP.
Okay. Well, that seems like that's a good signal. But yeah, thank you.
Gary?
But that's just a prediction of what fees and charges will receive. That's on charge, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's not we're saving,
It's
hey, this
holding
is
its
great,
head
this is a
behind
big
you.
saving we're making.
Yeah.
We're just predicting that there might be less activity that would be on charge. So that number could go to 10 million, or it could be depending on what extent of work of activity there was.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
Just the revenue budget.
Sometimes we often recover less than we were budgeting for as well, yeah. Rightio. So, I haven't heard anything dramatically different to what's there. So we agree with the staff proposal there. And then we get to other matters, I think, Mike.
Yes. Yep. So
We've come to our 2 hours too, everyone. I'm just
Right.
signalling that. So, yep.
So with councillor's judgment, is there anything else in that feedback that warrants consideration for this annual plan, which looks like including or changing something in our current plan? Indeed, any other really important matters that you just want to flag for consideration, perhaps another committee or follow up through GMs, or something that you might want me to follow up on, whether it be information or whatever.
Yep. Kate raised one before.
Sits outside of the annual plan.
So the one I want to raise is the opportunity, and I just want to make sure people realise that our regional land transport plan and our regional passenger transport plan are done at the same time as the long-term plan, and they have to meld together. That is a huge amount of work, given all of the opportunities in passenger transport at the moment as well. If we're consider being proactive, that we need to get in a line. And I'm really concerned, given the very substantial changes that are happening in that space, that the opportunity of getting this right under pressure, maybe that we're not resourced, and just understanding the flexibility to make sure we've got enough resources in there, because you don't get many opportunities like this to get in. I mean, we didn't do a submission on the last transport management plan because we just didn't have the resources to do it. And that was the one opportunity we could have possibly said, let's bring the Ministry of Education into the passenger transport discussions. Now, no blame on staff. They are doing a fabulous job and working really, really hard. But if we can't take up those opportunities to address things, and I'm just flagging, and I'm excited that we've got this PAT meeting now, but we need to make the most of it, and those opportunities are making sure it's fully funded. So that's a challenge to you guys. If you think we need more money, I'd rather be hearing about it today.
I accept what you're saying. I don't think there's a need to put anything more in today, but I had a quick chat with Lorraine yesterday, just to flag that concern. But I think we
We're just coming to Michael in a second. Yep.
It would be too early to make that call and find money to put in there until we really understand what it is we've got co-funding for now, and what else we might need to deliver. And then there will be flexibility within that budget that PIM will be supporting through to Christmas to ensure we deliver everything we need to for the RLTP.
And otherwise, we can have confidence in your transport pass, perhaps, because you haven't got anything else to do. But the only other matter is I haven't heard anything yet about the suggestion for a rates review, or what we're doing about Colin Skirter and there are others. And is that another matter, or is that something you want to deal with somewhere else?
That is another matter, is it? Yep.
I don't know where it's coming in the student.
We'll take Michael, shall we now? And then we'll come back to that one. Michael.
A couple of things. My apologies for the lateness of my attendance. The first issue is jobs for nature. I don't know. Have you talked about that yet?
We have at length. We're at the end, so we've got through all of the matters that we have discussed that one. Yep.
Okay. All right. Then the second issue is this Lagrosiphon control issue. I sent everybody an email this morning, and I think I've sent Pim and Richard in on that. So at the next workshop, I'm just flagging, I'd like to raise that issue, please, and get some work done prior to it. And in particularly the concept of, it fits in with jobs for future nature because it's exactly the same problem. Government has bailed out of all those programs, raised serious expectations, particularly in the Dunstan ward, about who's going to fund the rest of that. And of course, everybody's coming and looking at us and the TAs and saying, right, well, you'll obviously fund the shortfall or the continuation of this work. I attended a meeting with LINZ. Those figures have come from them. I'd always assumed that we actually were contributing to Lagrosiphon control on an annual basis in Wanaka and Wakatipu, and discover that we're not. And that Dunstan is in actual fact the only lake that we are contributing to as a response of that. Now, I don't want to raise rates, but I'd just like to say to you, in the communities of Wakatipu, Wanaka, Hawea, and Dunstan, I think you'll find a lot of support for ongoing and increased and improved Lagrosiphon control. We've made some big movements, but we have the tendency to go backwards if we leave funding where it is at the moment, and with government indicating that they may, in actual fact, be reducing the LINZ budget, which horrifies the crap out of me. But I think you'll find that our communities won't get too upset about a targeted rate, which need not be very high, but to keep up that work. And so that's the reason you've been sent the email. You've got the figures in front of you. I'd just like our staff to have a look over those, please, prior to our next workshop. Is that acceptable with you, Gretchen?
Probably not because of the timing issues at this stage, but
Probably clarity whether you're seeking, Michael, to add something to the annual plan for next year. Are you saying that this is something that you think we should be giving consideration to through the long-term plan and if any potential subsequent funding of Lagrosiphon? Annual plan or long-term plan?
Annual plan. And then
no, today's the day for finalising, unfortunately, and we've had a whole heap of
all right, well,
discussion
there you
around
are.
similar.
Yep,
Okay.
but I've just added that then. So
yeah, okay, it's in the same probably philosophy, I'd imagine, from councillors, but we can quickly gauge that, which is that we need to have a proper strategic discussion around these types of projects. In the meantime, we talked about with the integrated catchment type approaches. Richard said we were going to look in existing budgets whether some of these groups could be basically subcontracted to do work that we were thinking about doing anyway. So that's where I'm just saying where we got to. We've also decided today as a council to write to the Finance Minister about Jobs for Nature funding being uncertain, so that as well. But yeah, we're not able to provide a whole lot more information for the annual plan at this point. So yeah, you'd need to be making a very good case for why Lagrosiphon needed to have its own pool of money going to it right at this next annual plan, rather than strategically thought about as part of multiple pest. And
that's
diversity.
okay. Well, that's really easy. I mean, I could make it now if you want me to.
He can't do the workshop.
We can't make a
Oh, no, he can't, but he's putting a case for why he thinks it's another matter that
Or the other
needs
alternative.
immediate attention.
Or the other alternative is that when we come to discuss the annual plan, that I raise it as an amendment to the annual plan with all the background information as well.
Oh, well, I suppose that's always possible, isn't it? But now's our chance to discuss it as a council, I would think, but that's always something you could do, I guess. Yep.
Well, it's just that the cure, Lagrosiphon.
Didn't. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't want to bore you to death. It would probably be easier for me to move it as an amendment at the annual plan deliberation phase, and then I can provide all councillors with the background material for it and the funding proposal that attends it.
Yeah, it's always you're able to do that. Yep.
Okay,
So
then I'll flag that. I'll flag that now. But I think it'd be useful to pass that email on to staff so that they are aware of it.
Process to be hearing other people's submissions, and I'm concerned that I'm just stating.
Right. Well, yeah, you're welcome to say that, Kate, but that makes you uneasy. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me uneasy. This is a process at the point that we're at the moment is to resolve other people's submissions that have gone through the process to submit. And we've now got, as wonderful an idea as it may or may not be, they've chosen not to come to us and we're just putting something in. Yeah. Possibly it's exactly like the regional, my transport one, so I can be hoisted on my own petard or whatever the expression is on that basis.
I think the challenge here is, I think that we've got the heading other matters. Some of these other matters, and you've raised one yourself. I don't have an issue at all with Michael raising this issue. He also emailed it to us to warn us, and I think probably the best time to raise it is at the council meeting now, when we'll be looking at final approval of the annual plan.
Yeah, the process is open to Michael to use standing orders however he wants on the day, and that's good. He's raised it right now, like you say, so he's raised it in the appropriate place of other matters, and yeah, that's where we're at. Okay, Mike, you were going to say something.
Look, just to back up Councillor Wilson's comments. Look, I'm sticking my head out potentially here, but fresh all the feedback, and I'm struggling to recall any feedback about Lagrosiphon control from anybody?
Yes, I guess this is
So-
from maybe a lack of a confusion around what your title other matters actually is, because
It's
we're in a
just a bit-
workshop to discuss
Community
the
feedback.
community
Yep.
feedback, which is Kate's point as
Yes.
well. But then Kate also rightly pointed out that her she brought something up, but actually it probably was related to
It was the
some
buses and the
feedback.
new tunnels trials to be.
So if we strictly speak, we're here today to just look at the feedback from those that have made it. Then Lagrosiphon isn't there, that's right, but Councillor Laws is saying that as a governor, he's at this stage, whatever stage it's at, before we do that final stamp, raising a matter that he thinks is a issue, and that's okay. So, yep, thanks
I
for the
think it's okay
context.
too, Mike.
Yeah.
The challenge is we don't have any time for any more workshops prior to the
Yeah,
next
we
council
can't
meeting,
do
so
more
we've run out
work.
of time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Scott.
Yeah, cool. Cool. I concur with the comments made by Barbara Anderson this morning from the Harbour Community Group in relation to the harbour plan. And she voiced a frustration that it had been, the perception that it had been delegated to the port and that it was taking a long time. From a personal perspective, I'd like to see more governance and community involvement. I, for one, was the guy that kicked it all off and put in a brief and so forth. I don't have to be involved. This is not my crusade. It's just a frustration that it's in a system, it's budgeted, and my sense is that we could be doing more. And I think Barbara Anderson agrees.
Good. We talked about sending signals to staff on matters. That's probably one. So that's fine. Thanks, Brian. Yep.
Is there any feedback from that?
I think you're right. Sorry, in terms of when we set off to think about a harbour plan, that it was a bit broader than what we've got at the moment, which is focused on pretty much amenity around the harbour and recreation. We understood it would be a bit wider, didn't we, Brian? So we've only got a piece of the puzzle at the moment. And I think that came through from the community board as well. We understand that issue, and we've been having some discussions, haven't we, with all the parties, DCC, Port, us. Community board needs to be brought into it by the sounds of it, but understand the issue.
I don't know.
I don't know.
either.
How would I know that?
So Kevin Winters did kick this off and he wrote to Mana Whenua, DCC and ORC. I've had one catch up with him. He's still catching up with the other groups, and then we've committed to get together in June with an initial conversation around what the scope of the harbour plan should actually be, because what's been proposed by Port Otago, while it's a good step forward, really is in the amenity space, and we lack that overall harbour strategy or plan. Let's not call it a strategy, let's call it a plan. It's more broad than just the amenity piece that they're talking about. So once I've had that meeting, then we would propose to come back to this group to talk about what role governors would play in that process to then develop effectively what's been asked for by the community board and also by yourself, Brian, and others to actually get the project going, because it hasn't really moved since it was raised. Although we have had some conversations, but it hasn't actually turned into anything tangible. So
Yeah, I find it completely embarrassing, just the whole.
Yep, so I understand that. You raise a good point, and we've had some good discussion there. We've got a small piece of the puzzle, but there's a bigger puzzle to solve, and part of that solving is actually the coastal plan too, and also the land and water plan with the freshwater inputs to the harbour too. So there's a whole lot that needs to come together yet, and we understand that. So thank you, Brian, good point. Any others? Lloyd?
Yes, thank you, Gretchen. I'd just like to use this opportunity to revisit an issue that was brought up at the time of deciding on the draft annual plan, being Taieri flood and drainage rates. This is absolutely the right format to be discussing the issue. Because that was on the 23rd of February, I believe. We stood to be wrong there. So there's been a couple of months go past then. That's given us time to actually, being new councillors, to seek information go to the ground and find out what's actually going on, trying to work out how things are happening. And so I've done a bit of that in the last couple of months, and there's obviously been a meeting down there as well around the drainage stuff. I think over the last 2 months, it's become quite clear that there's obviously it's an area of contention, and it's an area where there seems to it's an area that's been of contention for quite some time, and I think it's something that we actually need to address rather than just sweep it. I'd like I think what I sent an email through this morning. So I've talked with the farmers and I've talked with one or two people around, but there's a few unanswered questions. So unanswered questions of information. So I think I'm disappointed that it hasn't come forward, but I did have a talk with Nick earlier on and he clarified one or two issues. But basically, I think I just think that now's the time, because it's all about doing the right thing. It's all about what's right, and whether it's what's right morally right. And I think when you get the doubt that there is around this project, you actually have to take a stand and say, hang on a minute, we need to stop and work out what's going on better, and before we move things on. So basically, it seems to me that there has been probable, and there probably still are, inconsistencies in the administration between the targeted rates and the work being done. There also seems to be confusion and uncertainty around the work programs, and resulting in tension between the council and the residents. There's often there seems to be differences between costs that are being allocated in the long-term plan as opposed to costs being allocated in the annual plan. There's been incorrect rates charged, then returned back. There's land coming in and out. There's so much stuff going on. The short and long of it is, and every time we have a speaker sits up here, and this is not just about the farmers on the Taieri. This is about the whole Taieri Basin. We've had the Taieri Community Board sitting up here telling us about the potential issues between flood and drainage for the Taieri area. So it's not just about the land where the farms are lying upon which the flood banks are located. It's actually about protecting a community and a wider group of citizens. Now, I understand that we're not here to discuss what are the wider funding issues. That's obviously been kicked off and started as part of our long-term planning to look at what is the right rating model going forward. But I think we do have to appreciate that right now there is an issue. We're actually creating a massive divide between ourselves and the community. We're actually fueling that divide just about every time we come together. I think it's actually time now that we actually stop and take stock and say, give us 12 months and we'll sort this thing out and work out where we go to from there. So I'd like to invite Councillor Wilson to reenact her motion from the previous meeting.
We can't have motion.
But I can indicate that I will do that on the 24th, and I'm really happy for that. Delighted,
Oh, well,
sorry.
I'd like to,
That's what you meant.
Yeah.
later
I'll
on.
have I'd like to get a sense of direction from the committee here today then, that we park time on the Taieri for 12 months. We keep the rate, we keep the targeted rates as they are in the current year. Now, I do this based on the information that was given to us back at that previous meeting from the manager of Gavin. Basically, if we were to park the rate, it wouldn't greatly alter the work programs on the Taieri. And don't want to go into confusion as to work that's being rated for and not completed or going to be completed or whatever. But the short and long of it is, if we park this for 12 months while we replan, get replan ourselves. It's not like we're going to create, it's not like that we're going to create a liability on the community. It's like we're not going to have deteriorating infrastructure in the meantime.
Yeah.
So that's basically what I'd like to bring up, and I'd like to thank Colin and Simon for coming up. But I'd also like to thank all the other 26 submitters that submitted, I think the 26 around the flood and drainage infrastructure in the Taieri area. That's what I'd like to bring up.
Thanks, Councillor McCall, and no doubt there will be some heaps of other questions.
I'm really keen this to be
yeah.
cleared up before the meeting, so we know where we're standing.
No, yeah, I agree. I'm just going to say that we're past our 2 hours. It's a really important one, this one, in preparation though for that upcoming council meeting. So we do need to nail this one. And as much as we possibly can, noting that we'll be able to talk about it at the council meeting. So thank you. One thing you said was that if we didn't increase the rates as projected, there wouldn't be an impact essentially. But I think what we did here, that we would go further into deficit. So that does impact on those particular, that's what I can remember hearing. I might be wrong. So we'll ask that question. That the community would need to wear that at some point, but yes, we would revisit the whole principles around funding, won't we? As part of LTP, but there's no impact of that bit. But yeah, again, I agree. The council needs to be transparent and able to answer the questions that were put to us around the uncertainty and the confusion. So I understand the sentiment. Who was next? Tim was, and then Brian.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying, Lloyd, but I am also aware that we have a proposed rates review, which really goes into a lot of depth and detail, and sort of uncovers more focuses on the principle of the rates as well. Now, I'm just wondering where that would fit into what you're suggesting, and perhaps, I don't know, Nick might be able to give us some more information of what the rates review actually entails. Thank you.
Yeah, that's covered in the we've got sort of two parts to the LTP. One's the program, the next bit is financial management, and we talk about what we're proposing to do around the rates review in there. So yeah, that's the simple answer, as we've got that coming up fairly shortly.
Yeah. So yeah, and as Lloyd broke down, there's two clear issues, aren't there? There's one they raised, which is around the fairness and principles of the current rating model, and they understand it's a future discussion. The other bit though is around where we're unsure how we've been rated and whether that's fair and along our current principles. Brian, and then Alan.
Yeah, I mean, what I take from what Lloyd's saying, is that maybe, and I'm not sure what I can't remember exactly what Kate's motion was, but two things. So, as a council, we could review and support next work in terms of a review and understand that scope and agree the time frame for it. And in the duration of that time period, we could, as you say, maybe we could agree to freeze the rates over that time period. I don't think we can skim over coming up with some of the too many detailed answers in reply to some of the queries. I'd like an in-depth consideration. One of the fundamentals is, for example, where Mosgiel fits in this whole rates situation, and Colin and so forth have their view, but previously we've had another view. But anyway, to me, that's quite reasonable. A review and a freeze over a reasonable time period, and then we move on.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out why we would be doing a freeze as well. For me, it would be around the first, not the we need to do a general principled look across the whole, which brings in the MOSGIL issue, and that's not the reason from my perspective. It's to do with the is it fair at the moment how we've been, but couldn't the council answer the questions as well as an alternative to freezing is my question too. Yeah. So, okay, who was next then? Alan.
Thanks. Look, I appreciate your raising that and so clearly, Lloyd, and clearly it's a long-standing issue that we really do want to resolve. Just wondering if you can clarify, because it is a bit of a complex situation, because there's Taieri flood protection rates, there's East Taieri drainage rates, there's West Taieri drainage rates and different levels within those. When you're suggesting freezing at the 2023 level, which of those rates were you thinking of, or is that yet detail to be worked out, do you think?
Well, basically, I think we need, I'd freeze all, I'd just freeze the rates at the current level, the 22, 23. And it's like a.
Is it the targeted drain or flood, or what is it?
Well, I do the drain and the flood, east and west, but there is room for discussion because the main area of concern is around the drainage rates. But you know, I'd probably do both. And just to answer to Tim's question, at the end of the day, if we proceed as intended to do a funding review, and that funding review comes back with a different funding model or system, then that's what we would revert to come 24, 25.
It
And
was actually requested then yesterday.
Freezing.
Freezing of what though?
All of them. Yeah.
East, west, flood, drain. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Alexa. Yep.
I don't think I've got anything particular to say on it. I think I don't think we can really be freezing things, but I do wonder what the risk is of, not to our budgets, but legally to, if we don't freeze or if we do freeze, and also if the rates have been deemed to have been unfair, do we have a risk there? No, we don't.
I don't think so. Nick, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, well, council sets its rates based on our policy. It's not a challenge, and when we go over this in the next bit, you're always going to have ratepayers who view their rates as unfair. If you move it from rates is just an allocation method of a pie, so you move it from one person to another, the other person will say that it's unfair. So you're always going to fair or unfair is depends on who you are and how you view it. So perception. Yeah. So the key thing is that council can go through, and council has frozen rates. If you remember back when COVID hit, went through a process where you didn't want them and didn't want the rates increase that we had, and we froze. We basically froze all of our rates from that point, except there was some that we still put up. So you could do it. The only question I would have is, of course, if you talk about fairness, you freeze their rates. We're proposing to look at all of our rates, and then you've got, what about everybody else? So will somebody in Lower Clutha see you freezing Taieri as fair? Probably not. That's you know, and if you go from equity, you know, when it happened in COVID, we did try to look at equity across everybody, like, you know, freezing the river management, for example, we froze the increase across all the districts. So it was equitable, slightly different amounts. But here it's just that now you've just got one. So you can do it. There's nothing, you know.
I think that we're confusing again the two issues, which is one is not a rates freeze because of it's not fair, it should be more skill paying argument or whatever, which should be discussed right across Otago, I think, as a principal thing. It's more the questions that Lloyd has and that remain that we heard of we're really worried that we were rated in the wrong place, under the wrong, and all I'm saying is, can't we answer those as a council? And then we don't need to freeze, because we either prove that it was fair or it wasn't fair,
I think
and we move on.
Yeah, but this is the thing, this comes up all the time, right or wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's perception.
Yeah.
Is the rating method right or wrong? Depends who you're talking to. Yeah, and you've got to look at, is it appropriate? Council's got a policy position on how we rate, and that's how we're rating against. Yeah,
Okay.
so from that
wrong?
point of view, the way that it's being done is right, because it's as per council's agreed policy. Yeah, now council
So
might
I
choose
guess
to
that's the
change
answer
that.
they're wanting then, which
Yeah.
is, no, you're wrong. We didn't accidentally rate it to the flood or whatever when it was drained,
Well,
or
that's-
whatever it
hang on,
was.
that's not-
Actually, we did it right.
That's not a rating issue. That's an allocation of the cost. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got two separate things. One is
So
where the
remedy that.
cost sits, and one is then how you rate that cost.
Yeah.
They're two slightly different issues.
And in terms of the allocation of the cost, did we make a mistake?
The Silver Stream work was included in the LTP in East Tyree drainage. So, and then that's been, as you've seen, going through the community meetings, outlining where that was. It's been identified that the work that's actually getting done should sit in the flood scheme. So no money has been spent on that to date, but when that happens, we'll reallocate that. From a rating point of view, although that, I don't see that as a reason to change the rating, because we base our rates on the whole 10-year work program. 300,000 that was included in the LTP against, I'm trying to remember how much over the 10 years was included in East Tyree drainage, might be about $12 million. It's not material and wouldn't change us as we were smoothing the rates and stepping through as we did.
Yep.
So-
Okay, well, I have a view on this. Look, from my perspective, you have to have a defensible model. And we have a defensible piece of work that was done by Castalia. Is that correct, Nick?
Oh, yeah, that's the right.
Well, that was only part of it. That's part of our, our policy around rating. That if you like, provides the, the general targeted split. And then there's another whole piece around the whole split of within the targeted rates, but of the zones and who pays within there. So there's two, but Castalia only did one piece of it.
In the end, it does determine how we choose to allocate the rate split. And it does. And Nick, you told me almost not long after I started that this was a challenging space. And so it has proved. My view is we need to do the full rating review, not just one aspect of it. Because where we take somebody's rates down, somebody else's is going to go up. And to be fair to Nick, and I'm trying.
I think we all agree on that.
I'm trying to defend you here, Nick, because you told me right from the start that this wasn't straightforward. That we allocate this in a particular way based on benefit, and actually there are probably other ways, economic ways, that we could choose those allocations. So I do have a view around that. I have met with this group. I've met with this group now 3 times. I found them to be reasonable people. They've put their case pretty much identically every time. The last time was with Richard, and I did commit to them as a chief executive that we would try and have a look into this, and we haven't achieved it.
Yeah,
so
we got all this. This is the first bit. We need the second bit.
So I have a bit of sympathy with the fact that we've taken a long time to do this work, and my view is we are going to do it in the coming year. And if some of the requests or points made in this submission, I can answer quite easily. But we have taken a long time, and I checked with Nick what the cost would be to us if we froze those rates for these people at the current year's level and not increase them as we've planned through the annual plan process. And I think, Nick, you indicated it'd be $80,000 to $100,000. Is that right?
It's 2 of the schemes that increase is 100,000, and one of them it's 80. So 280 across the 3 streams.
280. Oh, that's the
across the 3
indicated.
schemes.
Anyway, I think everyone needs to understand that. So that's what, if we were considering freezing, that's the cost. That's the money we'd have to accept would be a challenge for us in terms of the budget.
Yep, we've got that. We're trying to establish the basis for why we would do a freeze if we were going to. And
Well, that would be the basis.
it seems as though, yeah, the basis is that we should be looking at fairness of who pays, but then there are other issues to do with answering Lloyd's questions. And people are worried about that unless we can justify. And I think it was that 2 annual plans ago, we feel that we were wrongly rated and that affected 10 ratepayers significantly. It was 200K, and so that was the type of thing that got put to us. So people are trying to resolve that as well. Kate and then Brian.
I'm not sure that I'm going to absolutely be able to answer your issues succinctly. I think there are a number of issues, and the problem is that while there are unresolved bits of work that haven't happened, like the review of the scheme itself, like the rates review, and understanding the work programs matching the costs that are in the long-term plan, and therefore their associated benefits, then actually we're not going to be in that space. The problem isn't these farmers' fault, though, that we haven't done that work. It has been on our work program as far as I can tell, and we haven't delivered and therefore haven't got into that space. Now, what
we just checked that we did have a rates review on our work program.
To be clear, council has never resolved to do a rates review.
We've asked to have a, so in the last 2 annual plans, we have had motions that have talked about understanding the rate scheme and a working party to get that stuff. We haven't delivered anything from that to answer your questions. Sorry.
So
I've delivered on those resolutions. I've delivered papers back to council.
Yeah.
And the fact that, this is the issue, is that, these things take time and they come back. And I think I've delivered on what needs to be done. Part of what has been happening is that I think one of the resolutions that we said that it basically got parked by council, although the working group was being established, but to look at the wider, look at this for annual plan and then LTP. So, that's what we proposed out of this, and this is what's happening. And we've actually now got the proposal coming up. This is what we're going to do for LTP. And as Pim said, my view is you need to look at this holistically with all of the rates, because you can't just cherry pick one, because it's going to have a flow on effect. And that's what we're proposing with LTP, is to do this properly. So, and do all of our rates. And when you see whether you've read what's coming up in that, but when you see that, it's also, the focus there is around how we can make sure that we're funding activities to actually enable investment, rather than having these ongoing, conversations around where people, their view is it's unaffordable to them.
We got quite a few hands up. Kate, is it
I hadn't
on this?
Well, I hadn't actually finished when I was interrupted there, so that's fine. But the main one, and I think it's the one that Lloyd has brought up, is about that question of affordability. When you've got people submitting in the way that we got a presentation yesterday about the effect of those rates, and gobsmackingly eye-watering that they be, I have to question it. It's very easy for people sitting up here who don't necessarily understand the income streams of some businesses to say it's just pay it because you've got land. That's hardly actually listening to what the issues may be. And oddly, I sat in here yesterday and saw a paper from evidence from the RPS hearings, which I just read because it was quite interesting. And it was an economics report on where the rural sector are at and their crumbling income streams, and we just think, oh, just because you own land, you can afford it. That's not the evidence that was at the RPS the other day, and I just think we seem to be absolutely missing listening. I'm not going to sit through much more of this if this is what I'm going to argue with.
Yes, I can see that people have got their hands up. Brian, you waiting?
Cool. Look, to me, look, we're just getting a bit carried away. It's very simple. You know, like in the paper that comes to council next month, there'll be a little section, separate section on the Tari, and it'll have 4 questions in it that the council needs to vote on. The 4 questions are we going to do a review? And councillors put their hand in the air for that particular one. Are we going to answer the questions that Lloyd has identified? Is the second question. Another issue is that I don't think we've talked about right now, but has been brought up, are we going to have a working group from the community to work with us over this time frame, or maybe a working group as opposed to a liaison group, so the council can put their hand up for that. And the 4th one is, are we going to freeze? And listening to Nick, I'm not so sure that that's a good idea, but it's just a voting thing, and we can save our emotions and our logic to that day. It's very simple, and then we move on and implement it.
Thank you. I'm happy to commit to those answers. But I don't know when exactly do you need them by next week?
No. What I'm saying is you just need to flesh that out in the paper that comes to council when we vote on the annual plan. And when we vote on the annual plan, there'll be a section on the Tari, and we'll have to vote on that as well. and they, yeah.
I'm happy to commit to those answers.
Michael Laws.
Well, that's not quite complete, actually. Before we voted on the freeze, we would need to be convinced that some iniquity was at hand. And the reason we're discussing this is because our gut feeling is that there is. Yeah, Kate?
No.
And Kate has been moving on this issue for 4 years. I feel her frustration, Kate. You're absolutely right. The failure is not those who are submitting to us. The failure is ours, collectively. So I want to add a 5th question, which is we need to define what the potential inequities are before the next council or at the next council meeting that would lead us to a decision on a rates freeze. Because at the moment, what I'm hearing, and remember, I'm an outsider on this, just been listening, and what I was startled by yesterday, and the evidence was presented to us, was that it seems that there is a suggestion that there are urban communities freeloading of rural ratepayers on this particular issue. Now, we should be able to answer that question, and that will go a long way towards whether or not we have a freeze ahead of, I would hope, an independent review of the rating scheme. Yes?
Yeah, I don't think it's quite that simple,
No.
Michael. The difficulty is that there's always going to be beneficiaries from any scheme, and you can try and weigh up those benefits and maybe charge rates accordingly, or there'll be exacerbators, and you can also work out who has caused some of the costs and some of the issues, and then try and rate on that basis. So the economic modelling of this is not that straightforward. We heard yesterday, for instance, that some people wouldn't have had as much flooding if the stop banks hadn't been built at all. So, you know, these are the sort of challenges, and my view is, and what this group has actually asked for, they've certainly asked me for this every time I've met with them, which has been over the last 9 months, is for an independent review of this. And I think we need to commit to that. I think that's what we're trying to do through the long-term plan rating review, is that we will get an independent piece of analysis. We're looking at the funding model more generally, and some of that we're working alongside a couple of other councils on that. But we need something which is credible and independent. And I think the group would be happy with that, and that's mostly what they've been asking for. The issue for me is that it has taken us too long, and that's the problem, because in the meantime, while we've had to focus on the long-term plan, I've only been here 11 months. The right place to do this is the LTP. Unfortunately, that means that we've moved into yet another annual plan rates increase for these people.
All right.
Sorry, can I just, the thing that flows from what Pim's just said, though, Gretchen, is, well, 2 things. There is another aspect of that is, are there safety concerns if, in other words, if there is a freeze of the rates, and this would need to feed into that decision? Are there infrastructural works that need to be done anyhow? So in other words, if you're going to freeze rates, I'm assuming that is
Yeah,
a
we
less.
kind of talked about that there's work that needs to be done, and we know that. And
Yeah,
that
but I
actually-
don't know what their work is. So
we
I'm not in a
don't- we
position to
don't,
make
because
a
it's part of
decision.
the annual plan, but would mean that we would go further into deficit for some of those targeted rate buckets of money. So Richard, you've got your hand up.
So, look, I'm just conscious of time. We're going to have to shuffle the workshops this afternoon. We will do the LTP program workshop, but we will have to shift the first finance workshop to a future date in May. I would like us just to take a short break now for myself and Pim and Gavin and Nick to sit down on it and just come back with a proposal to move this forward to something by the 24th of May that we, so
Thank you.
let's just have a spell so we can just collect our thoughts based on what we've heard, given it's not an absolute, we're not going to get a clear steer, but we've heard a lot of concerns and questions. And I think in order to move this on, can we just have that break for 5 minutes and then come back?
That would be good. Andrew's got something really quickly he wants to say.
The main concern about fairness is the growth of Mosgiel.
Mm.
If you look at Mosgiel, probably since about 2015 or 16, there's about 2,000 more houses there established between Haggard Alexandra Drive and Wingatui. And as we heard from the submitters, Colin and Simon, is the classification rate that applies to urban versus the classification rate that applies to rural. So every time you get a development occurring in Mosgiel, obviously that reduces the amount of rate that they're paying toward the overall scheme because it's obviously there's more houses to rate. The other thing is every time you put a concrete platform, driveway, etc., the screening of the water in terms of the shedding of the water of those sites increases. So there's more water coming more quickly. Well, not more water, it's coming more quickly.
It's true, but we're not hydrologists and we
Yes,
need
so
to understand in a flood what
there
that
is no
actually looks
question
like.
about the rating review that we will undertake, and we'll talk about that this afternoon, and that considers all of those talk of fairness and equality and what's changed since we made that decision last time and what options have we got and what we model. There are immediate questions, and Lloyd put them in an email, that we need to come back with something for council to help you make a decision for 24 May. Otherwise, we will still be having this conversation.
We'll just give Andrew Douglas an out if he wants, given that we're not going to be having the financial discussion we've been waiting absolutely patiently for.
That's fine. It's been
Yeah.
it's been good to hear this discussion because there's a lot of financial implications from what you've been discussing today. So it's been good to hear the way you've been discussing.
Go.
Yeah, really sorry that we didn't get to that. And we do need to have that break. Gary, you have, is it extremely quick?
Oh, well, my hand's been up for a while. But either way, I can totally concur with what Andrew was saying. I think there is enough justification on the table. They will not go away. They have been raising it and things have changed. If I was asked right now, I totally support a freeze for a year. If it means less service across that year, while we come up with an outcome, then it's justified. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be adjourned then for about 5 minutes.
I must.
Two lots of skiing.
It's a day.
I just seen that through last week.
Oh, no, enjoying it. Yeah.
Yes, they are. But it's not, I mean, it's only the increase on this year.
I feel like it's only halfway through the conversation, so it'll be a few weeks and you'll catch up.
It is becoming. It is really to affect your businesses. It's just stuff it's just like you've got a target. You're doing once, so whatever we're doing.
We're back live. Thanks everyone for waiting for that adjournment. We are hoping to wrap this up within 20 minutes because we need to get on to the next bit and to give a steer towards staff from this. So having the benefit of that time to discuss, is there somebody who would like to start to report back? Would that be you?
I know it's going to be Rich.
Okay, cool. Richard?
Right. So what we're trying to do is, as we've talked about, separating the two issues. So I won't go into the rate and review other than to say there will be one, and that's to be discussed in terms of the long-term plan process. The 4 questions that Lloyd set out in the email he sent last night around rates, which were questions around how, or the accuracy of ORC's application of its current rating policy, which is what Colin and Simon raised yesterday, and trying to give a steer on those questions to help council then give some direction for staff to prepare what we need to for the 24 May meeting. So this, working through that, has the Torrey drainage scheme, and when we say the drainage scheme, we're just talking about this whole scheme. So east-west flood drain, we're just rather than trying to separate into the 4, been incorrectly charged for flood protection work in the past. If so, how much? So the response from staff is no, it hasn't been incorrectly charged. It's been charged as per the current rates policy. So that's 1. 2, has the Torrey drainage scheme rate been charged in the first 2 years of the LTP for work that should have or will be charged to the targeted flood rate? There was a 3rd question there. How much is the total dollar amount for the Torrey drainage rate and the proposed 20 give?
I'm just trying to work out the difference between, if we freeze, how much, that's the 280,000 that said this morning.
Okay.
So I thought was about, my figures come up to about 100,000.
So are there funds, so we've done that one. Are there funds being held for work that was planned to be completed over the first years that will not be completed during this period? So the way that it's funded is it's funded as a program. So if it's not delivered, it's still collected and spent within that rating area. So they still receive the benefit for the rates that have been paid. So even if something is deferred, that funding will still be applied only to that area in the future. So while we might not deliver a whole program, that program will still be delivered and will still be funded based on the rates that are taken at the time. And then there were some questions around or reference made to the Lagoima that's gone out. So that was something that council made an error on in terms of where some future work was scheduled to be charged to. None of that work's been completed or booked yet and has been adjusted based on what was found through that Lagoima process and now will be put against the correct rate. So there has been no error to date in terms of or financial impact based on that, but absolutely that was accurate. The information that was found by Colin and others or whoever lodged that. So that is has been or will be corrected when the funding is actually spent on that project and make sure it's booked to the correct rate. So that's where we're at in terms of those questions. So the other matter, I guess, really is just for council. It will be a council decision as to whether there is a rates freeze. We've heard it is possible. The consideration there is we're talking about the 4 rates and none of the other rates that are currently within our current rating framework for any other schemes or others. Ideally, we would get a steer from this workshop today, acknowledging that's not a simple thing. But really it's back to the floor and to you, Gretchen, and then we will go away with what we hear today and Nick and Mike will prepare what's needed for May 24, seeking to have it approved, but there's still obviously a process to go through at that stage.
Thanks. I think it probably is a fairly simple thing from here. People will have their own view that they can give a steer on, and we can probably raise our hands, even though it's not a voting scenario, but it'll give you a steer as to where we're thinking. Lloyd, what do you want to say?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. Can we just get some feedback on the last couple of ones as well as to what the current balances are for the reserves? Because I don't know, they're plus or minus, or some will be some not, but it's information that we should know. And the other one is what would the work plan adjustments be required drainage rate was.
Sorry, I should have covered that because we did cover that and Gavin covered it. There would be no change. We need to be very clear that all the work is carrying on as planned because that's what's been committed to.
So, Kevin?
If that's what you want us to do.
Right, yeah, of course, yep.
So there's no risk to safety of people or infrastructure.
Well, there is if we stop certain.
Well,
work,
no
but we can-
additional risk.
Yeah, I think that some of our activities on the Taieri are about reducing safety risks. But as I understand it, you want us to carry on delivering the works program. You want us to carry on delivering the works program is my understanding. If you don't want us to do that, then that can be clear.
Nope.
Got
that one.
Balances, in the annual plan, the balances that we'd forecast them to be is Lower Taieri flood, 1.99 million, West Taieri drainage, so that's positive, so in reserve. West Taieri drainage, negative 2.5 million, and East Taieri drainage, negative 300,000. So that's what we had as the projected balances for the draft annual plan that's out there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for answering those questions as best as we can. I know in a 5-minute break, that's a big challenge, but we appreciate your efforts there. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so we've got that info. No one's got their hand up there. That's good. Brian.
Just consideration, Richard, when you say you're going to do a review, at the same time, whether you would consider also agreeing to formalise a working group, with the community. Maybe that's already happened, I'm not sure, but just because it's all very well, we answered the questions today. Look, there's a lack of communication, there's a lack of love for these people who are paying significant money. I just put that to you, that you might at the same time say yes to a review, yes to do that, also to set up a working group for a certain time period to sort a few communication things out.
Yep.
I wasn't against the concept of restarting up something similar to what we used to have, which was a liaison group. I don't think there's ever any harm in having a communication opportunity to engage with any community, actually, frankly. But you don't want to bias your liaison group to any one part of the catchment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're giving that steer as well, that wherever we can, we want to ensure that we develop relationships, mend relationships, I guess, as well, and move forward. Similar actually to what we've talked about before as well, with the good work that's going on in catchment type groups. So that's steer as well. Okay, so we need to be able to prepare one option rather than two options ready for council meeting. So we've been asked for a bit of a steer. Alan, do you need to say something before I?
Well, I was just going to indicate how I've actually changed my mind and why I've changed my mind. Is that useful? And it's regarding the freeze on the current rates, because yes, of course, we go ahead with the review. And I think, we've, having heard all that discussion, that issue has been raised, why choose one area and not another area? And that's really important to have a good answer to that. And it seems to me, actually, I can have two answers to say, yes, we'll do this for the, or an answer to say, we'll do this for the Lower Taieri. And they would be one that, as Pim has said, we had undertaken to resolve this issue, and we haven't. And so that's one reason. And another, I guess, is the change in settlement patterns in the Taieri since that scheme was organised. And I could see that that is two justifications to saying why this is different from other areas.
So and also the implication of the freeze is that, and then can you help me with this? The implication of the freeze is that some of those deficits will go up.
Yeah, so those balances
Might end up costing more.
Yeah, the balances that I said will be respectively 100, 180,000 worse than what the numbers
so
I
that's
just
the
said.
implication. But this is a multi-year program, and we'll still be funding it over multi-years. So at some point in time after the review, we'll find a way of recovering that money accordingly. And the review may or may not benefit these particular ratepayers. That's the whole point of an independent review. I think, Gavin, the point that you made was really important. we want the steer from council that we're continuing with the work as planned.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking that through in terms of if you do a rates freeze, I don't want unintended consequences as well. Like, let's say the scheme goes further into deficit and has to fund that, what their actual cost is to them versus being rated. Yeah.
I'll be rated.
I know, yeah.
Just we have to recover $280,000 at some point.
Yep. Okay, Gary.
Okay, my steer would be that we do consider the freeze, even though it has quite a severe implication. My thinking for that is that I think there is sound justification for it, based on what we've heard from the landowners and heard within the room. My message would be that business as usual would carry on in what we would expend across the year while we have a freeze in place, although there might be some aspects of either long-term capital work or unnecessary work that could be deferred while we are in a freeze pattern, because we're only talking about a percentage above. We're still going to have what we've rated last year rated this year. It'll just be that the percentage increase isn't collected. So I think the freeze will help hurry us to get to the outcomes that the community is asking. That's what I would say. Thank you.
All right. Well, okay. Well, let's just show of hands then for who thinks that the option that gets prepared is for the so-called rates freeze. Who thinks that's a good idea?
I'm a possibility. I'm not adverse to it.
I'm not voting at this point, just as the chair. Yep. But looks like you've got a strong steer that will be the position. Yep. Oh, sorry, I didn't check on council laws and councillor Mepham, who are probably there ready to vote. Yeah, sorry, Kate.
No, I'm okay.
Oh, you go, Michael.
I was just going to say, Tim, that's fine by me.
Yeah, and look, I missed yesterday's session, unfortunately, so I don't feel like I've got a full amount of information that perhaps a lot of you guys have got. I'm okay with council's progress or decision through this, so I'll step back for the moment.
There will be an actual vote on the day, of course, but yeah.
Yep.
Okay, rightio, well, we can move on from that then. Thank you, everyone. Is there anything else that we haven't covered in this workshop that we need to? Lloyd?
Yeah, I'd just like to, I'm not sure if this is the right format for this one, but I think it's important to back this up with an establishment of a liaison group of some sort.
Yep, we talked about that just before and agreed that that was the way forward. Someone called it a working group, but that's the intent. Yep, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Support that, yeah.
Yep, okay, thanks. Yep, and
Well,
nodded his head and talked about it.
I mean, you all know it won't be me setting it up, but Richard's aware of it now.
Richard's taking that on board.
No, I'm not talking just with the farmers, I'm talking with the community.
Yep.
I am too, because it's very important that everyone's represented.
Yeah, you mentioned that before as well, exactly. We can't have skewing, we need to be totally open to all of the community, and that's the intent as well, so thanks, yep. All right. Nothing else then in the annual plan workshop? No. Thank you everyone for getting us through what was a robust conversation and to a good point. So thank you. We've had our wee break recently, so we're going to get straight into planning for the LTP and what that project looks like. Missing out on the financial requirements, I suppose. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your input there.
Am I being too noisy? Too loud?
Right, so we'll go straight into, we head till 3:30. We will, this isn't a significant session, this one. This is more of an overview of the proposed program for everybody. We will defer the what was going to be the third part of today, which is an overview of the essentially the legislative requirement around financials for the long-term plan process. And we're just working with Amanda to slot that in around the series of meetings at the end of May. So we might go just past 3:30, apologies, but hopefully not too far past. So Mike will work through, and I see you've all got it in front of you, what effectively is looking at the outline and the key components of the program. I guess what I would stress is that we are working towards a 6 December sign off of draft content for the consultation document, and that's really a key date, a critical date for us to then enable the preparation of the material for formal approval of the draft content in February 2024. So we've only gone to December in this program. There will be a full project program that comes to you, which goes out to 30 June 2024 in time, but this was really around the key work that happens this year to inform the material within the plan. So I'll probably just hand over to Mike to work through it. And then obviously, as any workshop, this is just open to questions and discussions. This is really the chance, if you've got specific parts of the process you're interested in, to fire those questions through to us.
Thanks, Richard. Look, just adding to a point there around Richard's point around this is the December snapshot, and it lands on a pre-draft LTP at 6 December. And that's really important because it sets you up to put forward quality proposal and engagement material and consultation material for your community. And you'll know the reasons around that. So it's sort of like that. So stepping back, looking at the diagram, it's quite simple. The grey circles down the middle are key milestones for the project, and they're from a council law perspective. So it's really about the reporting that you're going to receive via the CEO's report, and it's also about the key deliverables that you are going to consider and decide around, and you can see there's 8 of them. And that left-hand margin is the key dates that, and some of them we're locking in.
Yeah, so I should have said that too. There are some very specific dates in the left-hand column where you don't pay too much attention if they're not in your calendar. We're just working through getting those slots locked in alongside the plan and work plan and everything else that needs to be fitted. So don't pay too much attention to those specific dates. It's more just understanding at what month these key parts will be taking place.
So that right-hand column there, that's just giving you a sense of some detail that sits behind some of these milestones. And bear in mind that this is a bit of a layer cake. There's a heck of a lot more detail in terms of, from a programming perspective of staff, making all this happen. So that sits underneath this, but this is what you need to know. The only other bit of housekeeping is that this will be formalised. I'll bring this to your next council meeting. So it's at 24 May, and you can rubber stamp, and that gives it a bit of transparency at a stakeholder level and community level. So looking at the first two milestones there, you've got your current state. That's about staff presenting to you and providing you a baseline of understanding around what ORC currently does and delivers, and the funding associated with that. And so that'll be managers and workshop presenting their activity, their programs to you. And that'll obviously provide you an opportunity to seek more information where you feel you need to.
Will that be in more detail than it is in the long-term plan at present?
Yes. So you could potentially drill into something if you feel that it's a key thing that's going to help decision making through these milestones. Yep.
Well, I suppose the question is, I don't want to drill into something. What I want to know is the transparency that I actually understand what is in there, so I can then in advance. Because at the moment there's a whole lot of things in there that I'm not, because it's not at the fine level that I'm.
So the purpose of this is that we've heard around the table that there are there's a feels like there's a lack of understanding of some of the core council business that's funded through the
Yeah.
decisions that you're making. This is not a line by line work program. This is the management report on the key functions that our teams undertake to give you a good sense of what it is that is funded through the 23-24 annual plan as a benchmark. So it's really there to fill some of those gaps and to get you thinking about which of those activities might you want to be looking at through the long-term plan process to do more of, to do less of, to get rid of, to keep the same. So it's not a line by line through the budget. We've only got X time. It's to give you a good understanding broadly across the business of what it is that is currently funded to be delivered.
Yep. And so moving on to that second milestone there, that's a consolidation of the strategic directions work that you've started. I think you've gone through 2 workshops and you've got a third one coming up, I think 24 May, I think. And this milestone here really consolidates that work and delivers some priority. So it provides you with a deliverable that packages that work in terms of priority areas, some position statements around those priorities, and possibly some key topics that are standing out that are coming, come through those strategic direction sessions. That's really a front end for an LTP. So it's important work, and it's got draft in front of it. So which means that it can be refined as we step through the process. But it's certainly giving us, hopefully a strong direction from that point forward. And from there, it's a natural segue into stepping down into councillors' views on the business and the direction of the business, the direction of Otago ORC activity, and by providing some councillor scoping sessions on that. And your bullets off to the right there, directing key changes for staff to build proposals and service changes, and importantly some early direction to staff on some of those areas that we'll be looking at in more detail. And then you're dropping down into staff working with that direction from council and building up detail and options and presenting them back to you. And obviously that's an important milestone in terms of councillors and staff having an understanding of the position that's been reached at that point and working that through. And we should be in a position where we can have some clear conversations with our key partners at that point. And while that's not something new for ORC, it's certainly something we're looking to do a bit differently and improve the way we do that. And I think we sort of touched on that in earlier conversations with the annual plan.
So maybe I'll just pause there before we go into that bottom section. So that section through July and August really is the key part of this process. That's where council starts to give some direction to staff in terms of levels of service, and that falls out of the strategic directions and priorities work that has already been started and will be concluded before it. But just flagging really that July, August, the future delivery sessions, multiple, and then the key proposal and service changes section that will come from that really is a key part of this process where we're looking for direction from council based on your priorities about where you want investment to be and priority to be set by staff. It's obviously ongoing discussions for the balance of the year, but I guess just flagging those ones are critical. The external engagement, Mike's right, there will be early engagement with our the key stakeholders who we know are active and during long-term and annual plans, trying to gather some feedback from them early. So we're not relying on sort of late conversations and submissions and then consideration at deliberations time. If we can get them feeding into the process early, then that will just help that latter part of the process.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And just jumping back to 3, the council scoping sessions around future service delivery. Staff will be working in the background to provide councillors with some information around some of our foundational strategies, and that could look like, for example, what we know about issues at the moment, what we're certain about, uncertainties, our risks, and yeah, helping to support you and your thinking around future direction. So jumping down into the lead into Christmas, that's when we're really, from 6 to 8 there, that's where we're really delivering some of the key components, legislative components for our LTP. You've got your draft financial strategy and funding policy, which we've had a lot of chat about today, and you'll see off to the right there, the 4 lead-in workshops, of which today was supposed to be one, but we will have that clearly. May, June, July, and September, reporting back on options that have been modelled, and then indeed, council may decide at that point that it's actually something that it's important enough that they want to consult with the community about and have a full-on proposal and options for the community, if that's where you arrive. And equally, you've got your draft infrastructure strategy there as well. And at the moment, we're programming in around 10 August for the engineering team to get in front of you around a scope of what that strategy might include, and to seek your comment, feedback on that. But again, landing in November as a draft.
Tom seems to be looking at his one, but are we just checking that people online have got it?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the thing, but it's not easy to read.
Oh, okay. Should be fine. So,
which concludes around milestone 8, which is a pre-draft. So what that means is that you're giving a pretty clear steer, a very clear steer to staff that this is the position that we'll be consulting on, and as I said earlier, that really enables staff to put together a really high quality communications package for you that comes back to you in early in the new year, around February, late February, probably, and then you approve it at that point, and then we go out and consult. But bearing in mind we've had an engagement milestone in September. And look, as part of 8, there's 4 lead-in meetings to that, as you can see. So, and the first 2 are really looking at the detailed work programs that have come through from the earlier milestones, and giving you input and oversight into those. And along with that is the overall consolidated funding impact or fiscal envelope that we're working within to pay for that program, fund that program. And at that point, you're also getting a view of what some of those communication deliverables actually look like, so look and feel of them, having already earlier on in the program decided the overall approach. So there's a bit there. So I'll just open it up.
So maybe I'll just add a little bit to Mike, which is a good summary. And so there's 2 things I want to cover. Communications. So we have in the past struggled to give a clear recommendation to council around how we think the communications plan for what's an engagement plan for long-term plan consultation. So we do want to set that early. So again, in December, we can have that steer that we want to do workshops letterbox drop, whatever that might be, we will be bringing that through to try and firm that up in December as well, because that will give the staff time to prepare all the collateral and the plans and everything to be formally approved in February. So that's a key part for us. I think that it is an opportunity for us to have some really good engagement with our community on what it is that's in our work program and what we are planning or looking for their input on as part of this process. And there will be some opportunities to get out in the community to do that. I do want to cover off the finance thing, and Nick can jump in here as well in terms of those 4 workshops and what we're doing. We were going to go into that at that we've now deferred. So I think it's probably important, given we're in a public workshop and we've talked a lot about rates today, just to confirm exactly what that is. So the first workshop is a financials overview, which is really just the requirements through the long-term plan process. No decision making, no steer, no nothing at that point. It's just a bit of it's a 101, as I guess if you want to use university terms. Then we get into a second one, which is more around financial strategy, debt investments, and that's where the things such as Port Otago and investment funds and things come in, and actually starts to get a discussion and potentially some steer from council about things that you would like staff to investigate as part of this process. The third workshop is a rating specific. That will use an independent review that's currently being undertaken alongside Waikato Regional Council and Bay of Plenty Regional Council, looking at rating models, rating options. So not anything specific to Otago, just for flood and drainage and other rates, because they are also doing public transport and other things. So there's a high level piece of work being done in conjunction with other councils at the moment that will be used to have a discussion in that third workshop to start talking about what sort of detailed reviews this council may want to do, everything from a big bang review down to targeted scheme reviews or targeted rate reviews. Then the fourth workshop is for us to take the steer that's given in workshop 3 to go away and work up those options and model that, and to come back to council to have a discussion about what may or may not be included as part of the long-term plan consultation. So there is work already started that Nick's kicked off, and that will come to that third workshop. If you're looking at that 4 leading workshops in the bottom right-hand corner, that workshop, there will be information circulated ahead of that to start to help inform that conversation as to where we head next in terms of the rating review that council signalled that it wants. So that we are doing the work that will enable this council to determine what scale of rating review you choose to undertake, and could be all within year 1, could be staggered, and that's the discussion we'll have through that workshop. Is that fair summary, Nick?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, the piece of work is, if we had got into that the other presentation, the easiest way to look at it is this first bit of work that we're getting done with the other councils, because everybody's facing the same problem of, how do you actually enable investment, given that costs and the drivers of a lot of the activities have all changed. There's a lot more, environmental and social outcomes trying to be achieved. So we're all looking at the same thing. So we're undertaking a higher level review that's more strategy led, that hopefully will give us a good steer on what we can and can't do. So if you look, there's a couple of pieces around in the legislation, particularly around community outcomes, that we don't really focus on. Like everybody, we focus on the benefits thing, which is a bit of, if we go into those technical type reviews, we're probably going to get the same answer and have the same argument for the next 5 or 10 years. And we want to get it up to a higher level where we think we can probably facilitate, a far broader change that'll make it easier to enable investment and drive council forward without having to constantly get into the who's going to fund it and who's going to pay argument with every dollar we want to spend.
Yep. Excellent. So good, really looks like a really good piece. We're great to be doing alongside a couple of other councils as well who are facing similar challenges, because we can stay in touch with what they do through the process as well. And then the only thing I wanted to touch on before we open up to questions for Mike is the governance of the project. So we mentioned there'll be a project manager / project coordinator engaged to support Mike through the process, because, you know, Mike's the subject matter expert and will put a lot of the content together and support staff, but we do want to manage this project tightly through to that December deadline. We're looking at a governance group that includes the chair, deputy chair, and the co-chairs of finance, just not for input into content, to keep an eye on the project deliverables and the risks and make sure we stay on track. So that's and then everything will come to whole of council workshops, including all of these sessions that are tagged here will come through to yourselves for input into the process. Mana whenua input, so there is input into the strategic directions and priorities, so they're engaged in that process now, and they will be engaged through 3, 4, and 5 as a partner. So when we say external engagement, they are a partner that will have external engagement through this process, so we capture their early thoughts and can feed that through the program as well, and that's the statement from the partner, and we've talked about the stakeholders who will have that input. So that's the structure that we are looking to use, and the project reporting that will come through my future CE reports will include this one alongside the land and water plan and others. So we'll just go from there for questions.
Thanks, yeah. Pretty exciting in my opinion. It's really good to see this project planned nice and early. Yep. Okay, Kate, and then Brian.
I'm really glad that we're lifting up and considering a review of how we rate at a strategic level. And I'm just checking that I'm going to not be disappointed in the end. So the Act talks about benefits, but there is no limitation to just looking at benefits. So, and in the same way as in the land and water plan, while we've got the regulatory, we're also doing the catchment work, which is the non-regulatory. So there is a way of using rates in some ways to get the best behaviour, using we're starting to see that contributors to activities that may do things. So when you say we're doing a high level, are you really everything is on the table?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they make a look at everything and what are realistic their options.
Now, Simon yesterday talked about Tonkin Taylor report, which I'm not sure that the new councillors will really have their fingers on, and that was where Gavin's team had applied to government for funding of flood protection works, and in it quite clearly it spoke about the recommendation that all councils have a system that is more aligned. So while it's 3 councils working together, will you be sharing at a regional level?
Yeah. So why this has come up, we've been having conversations in particular with Bay of Plenty and Waikato, but the way we've looked at this, just to get it going, we're basically looking at it. We're looking at, and part of it is looking across all regional councils, what they do.
Right.
We want the deliverable is that we expect this report to be picked up and used by all regional councils. Yeah, so it'll give us an understanding of what everybody does, and out of that, like you said about, it's not just focused on one area, and it's not, you know, it's trying to get a methodology for applying those, you know, the 5, the 5, and then the overarching consideration, so that we'll understand it ourselves. But also as part of this, those other workshops that we're doing, the one that was going to come in July, as Richard said, more focused on financial strategy. If you like, financial strategy sits above just the pure rates. It's looking at all our other funding. And that's the other thing that we have to have a look at is before you even get into rates, you've also got to understand what are we funding in the first place, and things like, you know, length of payback period, depreciation, all of those things. So we want to look at the whole funding picture.
And I know some of you are off to regional sector chairs meeting tomorrow. I think it's really important that there is that feed into all of the councils, because I mean that's where the Tonkin Taylor said it's just when you don't have that consistency, it becomes really hard. For what is hard accounting to understand anyway, that we can't have a consistent story throughout New Zealand and how that's done. So I'm really welcoming that. It was certainly a recommendation in that Tonkin Taylor report. So thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Brian, you're next.
Yeah, cool. That number 3 for leading workshops, it's got ratings, it's findings of independent review. I know how I would read that. Findings of independent.
And again, you know, this is the shame that we haven't had time to do this other one but if you read the other ones there in diligent for you, so you can have a look at
The wording's wrong, isn't it? Nick?
well, it's not that, it is the findings of what they find of like doing the review of regional councils, some case studies, a methodology for applying. Yeah, so it gives that, it's basically the report back. Council then considers that, and then what you will do is decide, okay, what does this mean for us and how do we take this forward? And, you know, how are we going to use this to look at our rating model and what do we see as our issues and what we want to focus on and maybe reviewing and changing from there.
Hey, look, I like what I see and that's great. Look, apologies, I'm not actually here for these 2 meetings in June. They went in the calendar. So they've come a bit out of left field, I think, but is it possible I could sit down with Mike and actually give my feedback on some of these directions?
So the June workshops are the current state, Brian, which will be a template that once we get the direction today that there's comfort with this, we'll roll out. When you're available, someone can take you through those.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's fine.
Cool.
Yep.
And like these 2 workshops in June and July, do they fit into those dates, do they? 27th of July and the 29th of June.
I think they're indicative. We're still working through with governance how that will fit with current scheduled meetings and things.
Okay, cool. Yep. Thank you. Thanks for your work. That's great.
July would be the future delivery and our priorities. Yep. Anyone else? No. Lloyd.
I'd just like to say it's awesome to have a roadmap that we can, that's got it all set out for us in front of us rather than building it on the road. You could say so. I think it's awesome work that's been done. So thank you to people who made it for us.
Really fantastic to be in the position of treating it like a project too, with real project management coming through here to make sure we stay on track. But I haven't done very well getting us off track immediately with this workshop and missing a key component of it. So we will try do our best to remedy that. We're going to need to slot in that extra workshop about financial responsibilities and make sure we do that ahead of the next council meeting, probably even. That's all right.
Yeah, so Mayor, we'll work with Amanda to slot that in, and then Mike will also bring a paper to the end of May council meeting that just sets this out and just sets out that there will be a an arrangement, a governance arrangement, and then a high level program. So it is through a public, even though this is public, it just puts it in a formal paper, just be a noting paper.
Yeah, to date as well, we've had Tim and Kevin and Lloyd and I meeting to shape this up, and we definitely don't take any credit for this. So there's been a heap of work going on with Mike and Nick and Richard to pull this together for us. So really appreciate that, on top of everything else you're trying to do with annual planning. There's been a lot of work. This doesn't just come together, and doubling up on LTP and annual plan at the moment is a big extra workload. So thank you for that. Just one small thing, well, it's not small. We've got no mention of iwi here, but we will need to have iwi involved as a partner throughout the process as we've started. Yep.
I was just thinking that you'll see this on the diagram come through the council. Yep.
Good one. And we got Mana to Mana coming up, so we'll probably need to have a chat to them about this as well. That'd be a good agenda item, and just perhaps talk about who would be involved as well. Righty. Okay, we have no other comments, I don't think. No, good one. Just for your information, really. If you do have any, get back to us. Anything else, Richard? Separate from this? No.
Nope.
Rightio, we'll close the public part of this meeting. Sorry, I just need to as well do the karakia, don't I? Which I'm on it, here we go. So we'll close the meeting with karakia. Kia tau te rangi Māori e, ki runga ina iwi o te au. Thank you.